Japanimation Station.
Hello and welcome to Japanimation Station, an anime podcast brought to you by the folks at the Weekly Stuff Podcast. I am Sean Chapman.
And I'm Jonathan Lack.
And we are here once again to dive into the wild and wacky world of anime. This week on the show, we are continuing our look at the adventures of Lupin III with the most famous animated entries in the Lupin canon. We are talking about Hayao Miyazaki's film, The Castle of Cagliostro, that he directed for Lupin III, as well as his two Lupin III Part 2 episodes, episode 145, Wings of Death, Albatross, and the final episode of Lupin III Part 2, episode 155, Farewell, My Beloved Lupin.
Indeed, yes, we are talking about all of the big Miyazaki Lupin collisions from this era of the series, Miyazaki's final works with Lupin. The two episodes are sometimes called Lupin's Greatest Capers because Streamline Pictures dubbed Cagliostro in 1992, and then they put out these two episodes on VHS in 1993 as Tales of the Wolf, but they later reissued those as Lupin III's Greatest Capers, which was a very popular tape, and that is how that pair of episodes are often referred to in the English fandom. So these are not only the most significant pieces of Miyazaki's collision with Lupin, but the first Lupin media officially released in the US. And for this and various other reasons, these are the, as Sean was just saying, most famous and most well-known pieces of Lupin here and in many places around the world. And I have to say, Sean, rarely in the many, many years of podcasting you and I have been doing have I been this excited to do an episode of the show, because this is one of my all-time favorite movies. These are two of my all-time favorite episodes of anime. I have been doing a shit ton of research and planning and preparation for this. I technically still have COVID right now. We're recording this in April, and I came down. My number was finally called, but I am going to power through. I'm going to edit out any coughing because I am so ludicrously excited to finally do an episode on these absolutely titanic entries in anime history.
Yeah, and I'm excited because, like, this Castle of Cagliostro is a movie I have wanted to watch for a very, 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 very long time. Because anyone who's a fan of anime knows about the movie, right? Like, I mean, I think for most American anime watchers, this is, like, Castle of Cagliostro is how anybody knows about Lupin III
Yes.
at first, because it became very well known. As Miyazaki and, like, Ghibli became really well known in the late 90s and early 2000s over here with Mononoke Hime and Spirited Away, then you started to hear about, okay, like seeking out like some of the other movies that at the time were relatively more obscure. And then you heard a lot about this Lupin III movie, Castle Cagliostro. And originally I didn't have any concept that it was part of a bigger franchise when I heard about it. But then as I got older, of course, I then learned about what Lupin III was. And I wanted to watch this movie in like probably like 2011 or 2012. There was a point on a very older version of podcast that we did where we did a bunch of Ghibli episodes where I rewatched a bunch of movies and watched some of the Ghibli movies I had not seen before at that time. And this, obviously this is not a Ghibli movie, but it's a Miyazaki movie, and it might as well be a Ghibli movie in terms of it is.
Yes.
It is Miyazaki as fuck. Nobody needs to tell you that Hayao Miyazaki directed this film. You can tell. But I didn't watch it at the time. because I wanted to see what the context was for the film, because I have a disease that anybody who's listened to our podcast knows, which is that I have to see things in context. I'm like, it's why I watched, the most famous thing on this for stuff we've done is with Doctor Who, where I just had to start at the beginning, which was 1963 versus the 2005 revived series, and started watching Doctor Who from there. And obviously I've gotten a little bit better with that kind of stuff as I've got older and my time on this earth is more limited. But I still couldn't just sit down and start with Castle of Cagliostro. I needed to at least get some context on Lupin. This is why I bought the Lupin the Third Part 1 Blu-ray several years ago when that originally came out. I was like, I'm finally going to fucking watch some Lupin stuff so that I can eventually watch Castle of Cagliostro because I want to watch this goddamn movie. And so it has been a thing I've been wanting to do for a long time, just to like check off this fucking box, fill in this thing of this movie I've wanted to watch, but haven't been able to psychologically because I wanted to have the context and see and have a better sense of what Lupin was heading into it.
I have no idea when I first saw this movie. Like, it's so long ago. It's like if you ask me, when did you first see Princess Mononoke? I actually do remember first seeing Mononoke. There's other Miyazaki movies that have been long enough. I know I had the manga entertainment DVD, the one that cut up the opening credits, which was a bastardization because the opening credits of this movie are incredible, and all of that. And then I own this in several copies. When you say, Sean, this might as well be a Studio Ghibli movie, Studio Ghibli released this in the Studio Ghibli Blu-ray collection. I have it here. It's in the same Blu-ray collection as all of the other Ghibli movies, and it's the first one on the shelf because this is the earliest one that they did in this format. I have it that way. I have the 4K disc by Discotek, which has a bad transfer but amazing features. I have the soundtrack CD from Japan here. I have a lot of versions of this movie, but people know I love this movie. And of course, the episodes might be even better. There's so much to say about them. But Sean, I'm excited. You've been on a journey of wanting to see this movie. What'd you think?
It's a great movie. It is also a weird Lupin movie. Like,
Yes.
It's one of the things about seeing it in context this way, where it's like, it is obviously an incredibly well-made film. Like, Miyazaki's directorial style is like there in full force, even though this is his first film, right? This is his
Yes.
first directed film he did. And you can really feel like the energy and the quality of like the animation and like the storyboarding and the direction and all of that. There's some shots in this movie that are incredibly famous that I didn't think I knew from this movie, but then you see them and you're like, oh yeah, like this has been like absorbed in the public subconscious at some point, or it's been copied by later films. Like a lot of the stuff in the climax around the clock tower, obviously you have seen copied in a couple of different things, or in like every video game ever made, because it's like you realize, oh wait, is this why every platforming game has a level that takes place inside a clock tower? Is it just them trying to do this, the ending of this film? That's like literally every single Castlevania game has some kind of clock tower level in it, and I bet it is because of this movie. And so, all of that stuff is incredible. At the same time, it doesn't really need to be a Lupin movie. It's like the Lupinness of it is so light a touch that it's kind of weird. It's kind of weird watching it this way, where like, Lupin is not particularly Lupin-ish. Like his characterization is quite different. The other members of the Lupin gang don't feature particularly prominently. Jigen has some decent stuff, particularly the first 30 minutes, which I appreciate. But like, it definitely doesn't strike me. It doesn't hit the part of me that I've come to really like love in like the first half of Lupin the Third Part 1 and some of the best episodes we saw of Part 2. Like, it's stylistically so different. And its vision for like the characters in the world of Lupin is so different. And so it's a weird beast. And I think this is true of his 2 episodes as well. Less so for the first one, which I think intentionally feels a little bit more like it is trying to stay a little bit more in the Lupin sort of tone and style. But it's a weird thing with like Miyazaki and Lupin, where his style, Miyazaki's style, is so overwhelming that it kind of feels like it overwhelms and overtakes like the kind of the core aesthetic and style of Lupin itself.
Yeah, that's interesting, and obviously you're not the first to think that. There have been, like Monkey Punch himself, the author, has said, this is a fantastic movie. It's not really my Lupin. And I understand what he means by that, because it is in a lot of ways. I do think this and the episodes connect to an interesting version of the character more so than... And I've just had many years to think about this too. So, like, you know, I do think there's more connections there that I like. I like the idea in Cagliostro of this being like an older Lupin who, like, they explicitly use like clips or reanimated versions of scenes from part one to kind of like say like, that was his past, this is him older. There's things like that that I think are interesting. But yeah, I mean, I think an easy division with the movies is to say The Mystery of Mamo is absolutely the best Lupin the Third movie, and possibly Castle of Cagliostro is the best movie with the Lupin the Third name on it. But that's like they're kind of two different things. Like Mystery of Mamo is much more Lupin in terms of like the larger franchise. This is absolutely a Hayao Miyazaki movie, probably first and foremost, and a Yasuo Otsuka movie. We'll talk about that. Yeah. His fingerprints are just as heavy on this one. And yeah, but it's fascinating. And presumably now you have a good understanding of like, oh yeah, that's why this movie is fucking famous as shit, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. It's not going to be a surprise to anyone to say that, hey, Castle of Cagliostro, it's a very good movie.
Yeah, I'm glad this will not be some weird revisionist podcast where we're going to take down this great movie. But it's interesting to talk about, and this is, I think I said this at the outset of this podcast, Sean, this is part of what's fun about doing a season on Lupin the Third, is that we are only 4 episodes in, and we've seen some radically different takes on this character, right?
Oh, yes.
And it's really, that's part of what is so fun and fascinating, is the plasticity of all of this. But do you want to go ahead and dive into some history here, Sean?
Yes. Jonathan, you have the most elaborate notes document ever made in the history of our podcast. So what is some of the history that goes into making this movie?
I mean, there's a lot of documentation on this movie. I will say, if you're on the English language internet looking around for facts about Cagliostro, be careful. This is like, even by the standards of anime, this movie has an insane degree of misinformation out there, and it's the kind of movie that would, because it came out in like the 90s on VHS as the internet was getting started, and so there's a lot of info out there that is not sourced, but is like, a friend of a friend's cousin who worked at Toei told me this. That's the kind of info out there. So I have strived to do what I can actually document here, and we're going to do a little debunking as we get along. So
yes, because I will say I did not do a lot of research because I know that you know you're handling the heavy load on that, but I did a little bit, and I immediately ran into that. It was like when we did Gundam Seed for Weekly Suit Gundam, and it was like you just dip your toe and you're like, this is obviously bullshit. Like half the stuff that people are saying about this movie is clearly bullshit if you think about it for half a second. And yes, it is any anime from that period. Just broadly speaking, that came out over here is just steeped in weird internet folklore that has just been passed on from anime fan generation to anime fan generation. So it is definitely it's a weird thing out there.
Absolutely. So, quick recap of how we get to Castle of Cagliostro. Part 1 of the Lupin the Third anime from 1971 had that split that we've talked about many times between the early episodes directed by Masaki Osumi and later episodes by Miyazaki and Isao Takahata. When Part 2 started, the staff from Part 1 mostly came back to work on that first film, The Mystery of Mamo. Mamo is a giant hit right out of the gate in Japan, but there is some discomfort with mismatched audience expectations because the movie was made for an adult audience, like explicitly so, versus the kid and teen-friendly tone of the Part 2 anime that was airing on TV. But of course, a lot of the kids who loved the show came to see the movie. So a sequel to Mamo was greenlit immediately, 3 days after it opened in theaters is the legend, and the director's position was offered to Yasuo Otsuka with the intent that we make this more of a kid-friendly, or at least family-friendly experience. Otsuka, as we'll remember, has, and never did in his career, technically direct anything, as in, like, top of the call sheet. But, of course, he had huge outsized influence on everything. He was most commonly an animation director, and had a huge influence on all of Lupin in this era. Meanwhile, in those intervening years, Miyazaki and Takahata have been flourishing. Miyazaki did the screenplay and storyboards and scene design and key animation. The list of credits is very long on Takahata's 2 Go Panda shorts from 1972 and 1973. They then leapt into the World Masterpiece Theater series with Takahata's Heidi Girl of the Alps in 1974 and 3,000 Leagues in Search of Mother in 1975, with Miyazaki contributing scripts and animation to both. He's credited for scene design and layout. In 78, the year before Cagliostro, Miyazaki made his solo directorial debut with a show called Future Boy Conan, which aired 26 episodes from April to October of that year. Yasuo Otsuka was also heavily involved in that show, but that was Miyazaki's first solo outing. That show actually recently came out from G-Kids on Blu-ray in the States for the first time. It had never been distributed here at all. He and Takahata then reteamed to do Anne of Green Gables, another Masterpiece Theater show. After that, meanwhile, as I said, for that second Lupin the Third film, the film that would become Cagliostro, Yasuo Otsuka has been hired to direct that. He reports that the writing team from the show gave him a scenario in March of 1979 for a story featuring Lupin swiping treasure from a European fortress using a mole tank based on one of Monkey Punch's comics. Otsuka did not like that script. He felt it was too much like a TV episode, not enough like a movie, and he called in Hayao Miyazaki. Miyazaki is initially hesitant, but Otsuka says that he and Miyazaki had a very quid pro quo relationship in this era. Miyazaki had to pull a lot of strings to get Otsuka released from one of his contracts to come over and do Future Boy Conan the year before. So Otsuka basically called in the favor. And Miyazaki leaves Anne of Green Gables after 15 episodes to come direct the film that would become The Castle of Cagliostro. Now, if you're thinking, 1979, this is all the same year. Yes, This movie had the most insane production schedule kind of ever. Miyazaki began work on the film in May of 1979. That is when he comes back to TMS to work on the film. The film released on December 15th, 1979. This means that the film was created from its conception, from its hiring of the director, to its release in just 7 months, with the actual animation production taking place in just 5 months. It commenced in July. The movie had the same budget as Mystery of Mamo, 500 million yen, but this is a completely different scale of time crunch than that film had. I mean, Sean, is there another anime masterwork like this you know of that was done in 5 months?
No, I mean that's really insane. That's, and especially because watching the movie, you would never feel that.
No.
It is an incredibly well animated movie that feels very lavish in its production, and obviously it had a very high budget. So they put a lot of money and got a lot of really talented people to work on it. But yes, that is an insanely short amount of time to work on an animated feature. That's also 100 minutes long. It's not a short animated film. It's long by animated movie standards, so it's pretty fucking crazy.
Yeah. 500 million yen, I will note, was the upper limit for anime budgets for quite a while. Mamo and Cagliostro were both 500 million. Miyazaki's later film Laputa, Castle in the Sky in 1986 would tie that record. And it wouldn't be broken until the Gainax film Royal Space Force, The Wings of Honiamize, I don't know how you say that, in 1987, which was 800 million. So that was the upper register for quite a while. But Miyazaki spent that first month in May brainstorming and drawing image boards. He first worked on the setting, trying to create what is sort of the world of Cagliostro going to be. And he utilized, because he had no time to go research, he utilized all this stuff he had done in Europe in 1970 and 71 for the unmade Pippi Longstocking project, which is what he and Takahata had been taken off of when they came to do Lupin Part 1 in 1971. And he also used some of his sketchbooks for Heidi, Girl of the Alps, which is, again, why this movie has its very kind of European setting.
Yes, and it's a weird, Europe setting. It's because it's obviously Cagliostro is a Italian name. There are things that are clearly meant to be Italian, but there's lots of other stuff. There's a character named Gustav. And you're why is Gustav working for the Count of Cagliostro? So it does have a weird sort of mashed up, unified, vaguely European setting, which I find very funny.
Yeah. Miyazaki also incorporated some inspirations from Maurice Leblanc's original Arsène Lupin novels. Clarice, the heroine, and Jodat, the villain's henchman, are both named after characters from the books. Count Cagliostro himself, the name comes from a real 1700s Italian charlatan, and the Countess Cagliostro is a character in the original Lupin novels, although, again, none of this is the same in the movie. Another influence is an unfinished animated film from France called The Shepherdess and the Chimney Sweep. This movie has been released under a million titles. That's one of them, directed by Paul Grimont. It was a film where, disrupting the wedding of the tyrant, saving the innocent girl, plus the big, luxurious castle full of traps, all of those are influences. This movie had come out unfinished in 1952, and Takahata and Miyazaki have both cited it as an influence to the degree that they released the film in the Ghibli DVD library in the 2000s and sold it at the Ghibli Museum. The movie was actually finished by this director, Grimal, in 1980 after decades of additional independent work, and I found that very fascinating. Now this is a movie I'm going to have to seek out because it's like a touchstone for a lot of Japanese animators in the period. Miyazaki does share a screenplay credit on the finished film with Haruya Yamazaki, who was the original scenarist for the Otsuka version, but none of his work is in the finished film. That's a courtesy credit. None of that script was used here. Because the way Miyazaki did this is how he went on to do all of his movies. He started storyboarding in June of 1979, and he developed the technique that he will use for the rest of his career of writing the film as he goes through the storyboard process. This is sometimes called linear storyboarding, where just basically starting out and drawing the movie, and not, as a lot of productions do, working with someone who is like, you know, kind of set to do sort of the cinematography is a weird term in animation, but like the shot composition and stuff, it's just him kind of barreling through it. Reed Nelson has a funny anecdote in the liner notes of this movie. As he proceeded, Miyazaki would sometimes get stuck and would play with a kendama, Japanese cup and ball toy, to reassure himself. He would at first struggle catching the ball into the cup, but with a bit of practice, he would catch it every time. I do enjoy imagining a very grumpy Hayao Miyazaki invariably smoking and playing with his kendama while trying to figure out what to do with this fucking movie that had to come out in 6 months.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is funny because it is like a little kid's toy, is what a kendama is, so.
Yasuo Otsuka did stay on as character designer and animation director, basically Miyazaki's right-hand man for the movie, worked tirelessly on the film, never left his desk, neither did Miyazaki, basically for 7 months. Both realized their health wouldn't hold up in these conditions, but I don't think they ever did anything about that. Well, the Studio Ghibli does its like calisthenics and stuff. They're a little bit better at it. It depends. Japanese animation is not a super healthy work environment, but that's a topic for another day. Otsuka's influence on this film is obviously incalculable, just as heavy as on Mystery of Mamo, if not more so. And I think the more I look at it and research, the more I would effectively co-credit him as the chief creative force on this one with Miyazaki, because so much of what I think is notable about Cagliostro comes from his approach and style, the way he draws the characters and the kind of movement he was so good at. There's this anecdote I love from there's an interview with Yasuo Otsuka on the Discotheque release of Cagliostro, where he says that when he came to do Lupin the first time in part 1, he had been working on Kyojin no Hoshi, the Star of the Giants, which is a famous sports anime. And he says he hated that show because everyone on it was very stiff and upright in the animation. And he says this was a problem with a lot of Japanese animation at the time, is the characters would just be too stiff and rigid. So for Lupin, he had the same staff, but he instructed the animators, and a lot of what Otsuka is famous for is teaching. It is instructing other animators. And he instructed them all to sit differently. He said, don't sit so straight. Don't have such a straight posture. Spin your chair around, sit like that, lay down, sit on a sofa. He would lecture about sitting positions. Make sure you're sitting in a relaxed pose, and then have a different sense of posing for the characters. And I think you see that in a lot of Otsuka's work, in the dynamic posing and motions, and that is something throughout Cagliostro. Like, again, if you want good Jigen poses, there are some choice Jigen poses in the first half hour of this movie, but it's true of everyone. Like, I think the thing that I think Cagliostro is absolutely most accomplished at is just character animation. It is one of the absolute masterpieces of that, and I think you have Yasuo Otsuka to thank for a lot. The Miyazaki too, obviously, but I think we risk forgetting people like Otsuka when we just say it's a Miyazaki movie.
Yeah, and I have the Blu-ray, so I was watching some of the special features, and I loved that anecdote as well, because it does, and you know, the feature intercuts that with showing clips from the movie that show you some good examples of the kind of thing he's talking about, of the very relaxed, it'd been very naturalistic posing of characters, particularly Lupin and Jigen, that give them that kind of apathetic energy that they have, this kind of like just not giving a shit and just having fun and just relaxing and smoking their cigarettes and shit. It's very good, and it is obviously Yasuo Otsuka is like a really critical figure for all of Lupin in this era of defining that sort of how do these characters move in the world. Feels like it really comes from him.
Yes. So the order was for a 100-minute film, and as crunched as they were, Miyazaki actually had a ton of stuff that got cut from the movie for time. The biggest one is he wanted there to be in the finale a big air battle, and most of that material is cut. There's a little bit of aerial action in the scene when Zenigata and Lupin are on the plane together rescuing Clarice, which is spectacular, but it is a much smaller sequence. And then he came back and did episode 145 of Lupin Part 2, the Albatross episode, and just did all of that. And it is the most spectacular aerial animation of his career, but we will get to that later. Miyazaki later said he wished he'd had one more month on Cagliostro, which I love, like, the humility of that. Like, just one more month. Like, you did it in 6. What are you talking about? Just ask for 6 more months. It's crazy.
Yeah, why not ask for, like, a normal production schedule time?
Yes.
It's like, if just one, that would have been fine.
This is also like animation. So animation commenced in July of 1979. Storyboards were just a quarter complete. Miyazaki had the A part. This is how storyboards for films are done. They go like A, B, C, D. This is something Miyazaki wound up doing in a lot of his later work, where they would start animation while he had the movie a fourth, like, written, and they would just keep going. Princess Mononoke had a very similar schedule, where he was storyboarding the D part of that film, the finale, while they were, like, animating the rest of the movie. And it's just kind of crazy when you look at his movies, and they hold together narratively. That's what you would expect. It would be messier, and you don't feel that. But this film was animated by Telecom. Now, we talked about the studios that worked on Lupin last time. Telecom did the one that we sang the praises of most, episode 99, The Scattered Magnum, which is the one where Jigen has to pick up his gun as Lupin is leading him to the border, which is just insane. But Telecom is a division of TMS. They're founded during the run of Part 2. They first animated episodes 72, 77, 82, 84, 99, and 105 of Part 2. Before then, they moved over to do Cagliostro, and so they were gone for the next 40 or so episodes, and then they come back later. So a bit about Telecom. At the outset, Telecom did not actually have the best staff members. It had mostly newbies. And so there's a lot of gradual migration of talent from OPRO, which is one of the other studios, and TMS itself to Telecom to rectify this. Yasuo Otsuka is actually one of the first people they bring in, basically to teach the new animators. Otsuka arrived at Telecom after finishing work with Miyazaki on Future Boy Conan in 1978. He found the 40 animators working there mostly sort of useless. They'd been working on the Mystery of Mamo movie, but they were pretty inexperienced. According to him, they had made life hell for Yuzo Aoki and Yoshio Kabashima on that film, the animation directors of that movie. So Otsuka set to work trying to whip those young animators into shape. His first effort is to pick 6 he felt promising to animate episode 72, the skateboard murder mystery, which ended in disaster because Otsuka had to redraw most of the episode himself. He called it the worst piece of animation of his career. It's not that bad. That's a great episode. That is an episode, I went through and watched all the Telecom episodes, and that one is about, it is a murder mystery involving a young boy who is the son of famous American detective Columbo, Peter Falk's Columbo, named Bolonko. And he is basically just Conan's character model from Future Boy Conan, down to same actor, same voice actress, but with a Columbo-style trench coat, and he goes around in a skateboard. It's extremely cute. It is the most Yasuo Otsuka episode of Part 2. It's kind of incredible. But Otsuka was mad at those animators. Those 6 were never credited on Lupin again, which I found very funny to read. Anyway, after that point, Otsuka decided to start bringing in outside staff to bolster the ranks from Tokyo Movie and OPRO. This includes Kazuhide Tobonaga, who had been one of the main stars at OPRO and did a huge stretch of Cagliostro. And then Shigetsugu Yoshida joined in that period as well, and he is the director and storyboarder behind most of the Telecom episodes other than 145 and 155, and he is the assistant director on Cagliostro. Telecom's work on Cagliostro is sort of a trial by fire due to the scheduling demands, but working under Miyazaki and Otsuka clearly invigorates the team. Their post-Cagliostro work is episodes 143, 145, 151, 153, and 155, and those are widely considered some of the all-time best pieces of TV animation, and for good reason. We watched 151, which is the one the truck chase episode from Part 2, which we noted was incredible. But all of those are on that level. 145 and 155, the Miyazaki ones being the most extraordinary, but they are all on a similar plane. And even the ones that Miyazaki did not direct adopt the character designs and sort of stylistic traits from Cagliostro the movie. So Telecom's a really tightly oiled machine for these episodes. I also want to note that the iconic car chase in the first act of Cagliostro, which is one of the most famous scenes in the movie, it's where Lupin and Jigen are going after the men chasing Clarice. That's drawn by Kazuhide Tomonaga, one of the key animators at OPRO who migrated to Telecom. Yuzo Aoki, the guy we've mentioned several times, he did like the car animation in episode 1 of part 1. He was one of the major figures on Mamo. He was actually supposed to work on Cagliostro, but did not like working with Miyazaki for whatever reason. So Tomonaga was given his material. That car chase, according to Tomonaga, took 2 full months to animate, all of August and September of 1979. And he says he does not even remember how many drawings it was, just that it was a lot of them. And he was not really a car person the way Otsuka and Miyazaki were. So there were a lot of corrections, a lot of he has this whole interview on the Discotheque disc explaining the math involved in figuring out how far you move the background to give a sense of speed. And he said Otsuka taught him it's about the length of the car, and then you do this calculation based on 24 frames per second, length of the car, how many millimeters do you want to pull the background to do a speed, if you're saying we want to go 70 kilometers an hour, blah, blah, blah. But my favorite insight of Tomonaga on the movie is that he talked about Miyazaki's storyboards had a certain essence and feel to them that he wanted to recreate. He said Miyazaki is very fast with his hands, draws very quickly. And if you look at Miyazaki's storyboards, you absolutely see that throughout his career. And he wanted to bring across the quickly drawn nature of the boards, that momentum and movement, wanted to express that as much as possible, the dynamism of the storyboards. And I think Cagliostro I think it's one of Miyazaki's best movies, and I think this is one of the reasons why. I think it is one of the ones that best captures that kind of immediacy and vitality to those posings and sketches that Miyazaki does in his boards. It's you get this a lot in Miyazaki's early work. I think Laputa is another one that is on this level, but it is something that's incredible, and Tomonaga, one of the major figures here. All right, so that's all the production background. Cagliostro released in December 15th, 1979. It initially underperformed. It made quite a bit less than Mystery of Mamo. It made just about 600 million yen, only 100 million yen over its budget. Miyazaki returned to TV. In 1980, he made those 2 more Lupin episodes with the Cagliostro team. And then he spent his remaining years at TMS working on Sherlock Hound, a very ambitious TV anime that he made 6 episodes of before the project was put on the back burner because of rights issues with the estate of Arthur Conan Doyle in 1982. The project was later revived and finished by director Kyosuke Mikuriya, who was one of the Lupin Part 2 leads. He did 84 episodes of the show. And that was in 1984, but Miyazaki had already left to do a project that is also very related to Cagliostro and his Lupin work, which is Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind. Couple of connections here. During the production of Cagliostro, Miyazaki met Toshio Suzuki for the first time. Suzuki is famous as the lead producer and co-founder at Studio Ghibli, still is the main producer guy there. Suzuki at the time was editor of a magazine called Animage. Miyazaki was a very cranky bastard, though, and would not let Suzuki take any pictures of him working when he came to do a feature on Cagliostro, though apparently he did barely manage to get a picture of Miyazaki playing with the ball and cup toy. Suzuki was very impressed, though, with Miyazaki's work and invited him to do some art for Animage, heard about his idea for this thing he wanted to do called Nausicaa, which if you know the history of, Miyazaki had been doing watercolors and storyboards and things for something that would become Nausicaa for many years. So
He's
Suzuki,
look, I've got this idea about a girl with a bob cut and she's got a flying machine. Now
Yes.
Stop me if you've heard this one before.
Indeed. We just got one called, is it Shun's Journey, that was just translated in the US for the first time, which is another Nausicaa prototype. He was obsessed with this for years. So Suzuki tried pitching it as a film to producers, but he found that all the producers wanted a manga. They wanted a comic tie-in. And so he encouraged Miyazaki to do that, and Miyazaki basically left TMS to do the Nausicaa manga, which began serialization in Animage in 1982, became a big hit. It is then animated by Topcraft, which is one of the other 4 studios behind Lupin the Third Part 2, as its 1984 movie that properly launches sort of Miyazaki's solo career, and Topcraft then becomes Studio Ghibli when it goes bankrupt, and Miyazaki, Takahata, and Suzuki buy it. One other Nausicaa connection here. This is a big one. Sumi Shimamoto, who eventually voiced Nausicaa, plays Clarice in Castle of Cagliostro, and she plays Maki in episode 155, the character whose name I had to look up because I wrote her in my notes as Nausicaa, because she is Nausicaa's character design other than the clothes. So in all sorts of ways, it is very accurate to say these final bits of involvement with Lupin had a huge impact on the creation of Nausicaa and on on Miyazaki's future career.
Yeah, and you know, also notable here, in a similar kind of way, just looking in the other direction, we mentioned this in Lupin the Third Part 1, but also a big part of like the making of Cagliostro is him bringing all these ideas he had incorporated into previous projects,
yes,
and kind of bringing all those forward and kind of combining them together into kind of what Cagliostro is, which was a hilarious thing for me watching it the way that we did for the podcast, where we watched Part 1, and then I saw on the liner notes for the Part 1 Blu-ray, every single Miyazaki episode, the entire liner notes were like, and this was a scene he would later use, and this was a scene, and then watching the movie, you're like, oh yeah, no, yes, this is like a weird amalgam of like 3 or 4 of his episodes from Lupin the Third Part 1. So definitely you just get the sense of him having some of these like really key ideas of things he's really interested in, like girls with bob cuts and airplanes, and he's just sort of trying to work all those in somehow, trying to work all those ideas out until eventually he gets to make Nausicaa the Valley of the Wind.
Indeed, it's really interesting. And there's a famous quote of Miyazaki talking about, kind of dismissively talking about Cagliostro as a sort of clearing sale of all the work he'd done up to that point. I do want to say people make too much of that. Miyazaki speaks dismissively of everything he's ever done in his life because he's a Japanese animator. They just do that. We also have seen that with like Yoshiyuki Tomino just hating everything he's done. He doesn't act. They're kind of playing it up, and it's a weird Japanese humility thing, right? Don't take Miyazaki too seriously when he is grumpy in the press. He is frequently grumpy in the press. I just want to say that. Yeah. But Cagliostro, not a hit when it came out. It was the enormous success and cultural impact of Nausicaa in 1984, which was a watershed moment that led to a rediscovery of Cagliostro, which TMS capitalized on with a lot of merchandising. And of course, the film went on to have a massive influence on the history of animation all over the world, not just on anime. It is renowned in Japan as one of the greatest anime films of all time. Just a couple of polls I found. Kinema Junpo, which is Japan's oldest film journal, named it the greatest Japanese animated film ever in 2009. Japan Media Arts Festival in 2006, for its 10th anniversary, polled 80,000 Japanese fans on best anime and manga. Cagliostro was named the 5th best anime of all time, right behind the original Mobile Suit Gundam. NHK, the broadcaster, did a poll 5 years ago that had Cagliostro at number 44 out of 100 in a list that was almost entirely contemporary 2000s era anime. So it tells you which like pre-2000s works have stuck in the Japanese consciousness. And I'm sure, Sean, you being someone who consumes like VTubers and podcasts and Japanese media all the time, can attest to like its cultural penetration in Japan.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a touchstone the way that like a classic Disney film is over here. You know, it's in the way that like Little Mermaid or Beauty and the Beast is just a thing you can assume that people know about. Castle of Cagliostro, I mean Lupin in general, but like specifically Castle of Cagliostro amongst Lupin works is definitely at that status.
Absolutely. It's also very influential on Western animation. Disney animators in the early 80s were obsessed with this movie. Its influence is seen in subsequent Disney Renaissance films, most notably The Great Mouse Detective, which has a clock tower finale ripped right out of this. Gary Truesdale has said it very much inspired Atlantis, The Lost Empire specific scenes. The director of the Simpsons movie referenced the car animation in how they did car stuff in that movie. And the Pixar people will not shut up about the Castle of Cagliostro. John Lasseter has spoken about it extensively. He wrote the intro to the English translation of Miyazaki's book Starting Point and wrote a lot about the film there. So this movie has had an impact, we can say.
Yeah, no, yeah, it's and it is well known, right? Like, it's just, again, like, I have known about this movie forever. I do not know at what point I heard Castle Cagliostro's name for the first time. I think it's like, it's in there with stuff like Ghost in the Shell and Akira as just like, if you have heard of an anime, you have heard of this film.
And it's one of those anime that, like, its reputation around the world is pretty even. This is not one that like is more famous in the West than it is in Japan or vice versa. It just kind of has its influence everywhere. Partially because it did have screenings in America pretty early on. Its first screening was at a convention called Worldcon in 1980, where this anime fan club called the Cartoon Fantasy Organization, or CFO, they had been showing a bunch of cartoons at their meetings, and TMS reached out and said, stop doing that, that's a copyright violation, but would you guys be able to take those tapes and give them to like executives to see if they could dub our stuff? Which I think is a hilarious anecdote. But it wound up being there like, well, we could show it at this convention. And so TMS actually sent a print that they subtitled in Japan to this convention in 1980, and VHSs of that print then circulated for years. And those subtitles, which are kind of infamous as an early attempt by a Japanese studio to subtitle their own work, were actually preserved by Discotek, and they're on the Blu-ray and the 4K disc. If you want to see how TMS subtitled this movie in 1980, it's kind of amazing, because they're very minimalist, because the subtitles were printed really big, but it's an interesting... I can't believe Discotek went to the trouble of that, or I can believe they're crazy people, but I love that they did it.
Yes, I want all of the obscure subtitle tracks made, please. Thank you.
Yes.
It's fantastic.
Indeed. So yeah, it was shown to Disney animators in the early 80s. It was shown at the 1980 Filmex Festival, which was a big festival in LA at the time, because Disney animators pushed for it to happen. It was then integrated into the 1983 game Cliffhanger, which we talked about on the Mystery of Mamo episode, because that game, which is basically a Dragon's Lair sort of rip-off, because Dragon's Lair got big and then they made this. It's one of those Laserdisc games where you like pick, do you go left or right, and, you know, that kind of thing. Yeah. It's mostly footage from Cagliostro. It has some footage from Mamo. They used Mamo footage for the death scenes, like when you die, Lupin gets hanged, which I think is fucking amazing, because that's the first scene in Mamo. And the big car chase, which is a highlight of the movie, is one of the highlights of that game in sort of its memory. Then it was dubbed by Streamline Pictures in 1992. Fairly unfaithful adaptation, including changes like calling Lupin Wolf for the first time. That was due to copyright reasons. That dub also has a weirdness that I think is fascinating, where Jigen is always calling Lupin Boss, which I fucking love. Because if you've only seen Cagliostro, I could understand making that choice. But, like, obviously Jigen would never call Lupin Boss. It's such a funny way to think about it. But yeah, in that period, here's one of my favorite facts, Sean. Streamline had the 35mm print of that 1980 subtitled version. It was the original copy of that from which all the other prints and VHSs were made, and they rented it to theaters across the country. And it played on that repertory circuit for decades in the US, just that one print, because TMS wouldn't make a new print. They kept asking TMS, could you make a new print? And my guess is TMS didn't have a new print with those subtitles. Like, they probably just didn't have any record of that. So that print was shown until it was worn out. Even after they lost the license to Lupin in the 90s, they continued to send out the print, getting permission from TMS, until the year 2002. That print survived and was shown in theaters from 1980 to 2002, 22 years. What condition was it in? I want to know so bad. I want to see it.
Yes, yeah. I want to see just how, like, faded and fucked up the image must have looked by that point.
Yes.
Because that's pretty great.
Manga Video got the rights in 1998 and produced the newer dub that stars David Hayter, Solid Snake, as Lupin in 2000.
Lupin the Third.
I did listen
Metal
to
Gear?
it. It's a very normal voice, and I am sad he didn't do his, like, Solid Snake voice, because that would have been funnier.
Yeah, I was very shocked when I booted up my Blu-ray and saw that one of the special features was an introduction by David Hayter. I'm like, what the fuck is David Hayter introducing the Lupin the Third movie? And then I was like, oh, I guess he was one of the dub voices for Lupin. I guess that kind of makes sense. But then if you watch it, I was very upset that they didn't on that put, when they have, like, the name that pops up with, like, who he is. It said David Hayter, and it was like, writer of the X-Men movie or whatever, but it didn't say David Hayter, voice of Solid Snake. It's like, come on.
Yes.
Everyone knows him as the voice of Solid Snake. Like, the fact that David Hayter was one of the screenwriters on the X-Men movie is like a weird trivia that people know, not the thing that people know David Hayter from. Let's get our David Hayter perspective proper here.
This dub was the first dub produced in the English-speaking world that used the Lupin pronunciation. Previously, like the streamlined dub had gone Lupin. This one is also notable for using just a shit ton of curse words, because the idea was if you get a higher rating on your dub, more teens will be interested in buying it. In the UK, this was known as 15ing because you were trying to get a BBFC 15 rating. A bunch of dubs did this in the period. I did listen to like the first 5 minutes, and like when Lupin and Jigen are running through and all the cars are cut up, presumably by Goemon off screen, they're yelling like, son of a bitch! And then like Jigen is like, Lupin, you crazy bastard! And it's just like all over the place. And so when Discotech got the license to release this in 2012, they went back to that dub. They got the original stems and they remixed it for surround. But in doing that, they also produced a family-friendly edit, cutting out all the swearing, because that is a weird thing to do on this movie. Like, if you haven't seen this movie, I don't know, imagine My Neighbor Totoro with a bunch of swearing. That'd be fucking weird, right? Totoro's a little more kid-friendly. Imagine Laputa, Castle in the Sky, where Pazu is running around being like, you son of a bitch! You know, that would be what they did with Lupin, and it's very funny.
Yeah, it is like putting a bunch of curse words in the dub for Mystery of Mamo would make perfect sense. It does not make sense at all for this film.
Final bit of my really long history rant, Sean. The question of the day. Has Steven Spielberg seen the Castle of Cagliostro, and was he influenced by it for Raiders of the Lost Ark? Because that is the most persistent rumor around this movie.
So it just is on the Wikipedia page for this film. And then if you read the entry, that's where you're like about halfway through and you're like, oh, okay. And then you think about it like, maybe this doesn't make any sense at all what Wikipedia is trying to tell me.
Let's break it down. This is so persistent, not just Wikipedia, Sean, that manga DVD release, the one with the David Hayter dub from 2006, even has a quote on the front where it says, one of the greatest adventure movies of all time, Steven Spielberg. There is, though, as far as I and others who have researched this can tell, no attribution for this quote. It is often attributed to Spielberg having seen the film at the Cannes Film Festival and gushing about the car chase scene. The problem is, the Castle of Cagliostro never screened at the Cannes Film Festival. I cannot find any specific instances of Spielberg talking about this movie in particular. He has voiced admiration for Hayao Miyazaki. He's talked about Spirited Away in particular, but not Cagliostro. The closest link between Spielberg and Cagliostro I have found, and others have found, is that in The Goonies, which is a movie Spielberg produced, there's a cliffhanger arcade cabinet that now Oscar-winning actor Ke Kwan in his child role in that movie is playing in one scene, and you see Lupin in that scene because of it. That's about it. It is not impossible that Steven Spielberg saw this film in time for it to influence Raiders, because there was the 1980 screening and tapes did circulate, but there is absolutely no proof that this ever happened. As fun as that would be, I need y'all to calm down on this, because there is zero proof.
Also, am I crazy to just point out there's nothing in particular about Raiders of the Lost Ark that seems to be influenced by Castle of Cagliostro, other than that they're both adventure movies? Like, look, Castle of Cagliostro is a great movie. It didn't invent the, like, wisecracking hero and adventure genre. That kind of predates it, you know? It's like, you know, I think they have a similar kind of spirit because they occupy a similar genre of fiction. But it's not like The Great Mouse Detective, where you look at the end of that movie and you look at the end of Castle of Cagliostro and it's like, there is a clear A to B here of influence that is very evident. There's no one scene in Raiders you look at, it's like, well, clearly, see, there's a car chase in Raiders of the Lost Ark, and there is also a car chase in Castle of Cagliostro. Therefore, all movies that have car chases after 1979 must have been influenced by Castle of Cagliostro. It's just an insane rumor. I don't know where the assumption comes from.
It's so weird, because if you want to say the Castle of Cagliostro has a massive influence, there's no limit to examples you can give. Mm-hmm. You were talking earlier about, like, you know, clock tower levels in video games. Point out the big clock tower level in Mario 64 if you want. There is more of a to B line you can draw there than with the Spielberg example. So it is, I agree, It feels like a desperation to try to like get anime out of the ghetto by saying that Senpai Steven told us it was good. But you don't need to do that. It's good whether or not Steven Spielberg has seen it.
Yeah, and I bet he has. I'm sure he's seen it. I don't know if he saw it in 1980, but I would be surprised if he hadn't seen this movie at some point. I do not think that this movie, it makes no sense in terms of a timeline that this movie would have been an influence on Raiders, and there's nothing in Raiders that seems to be a specific influence.
Also, we know what Raiders influence, we know what the influence on Raiders was. It's very well documented. Also, George Lucas was the person who came up with the setting of Raiders of the Lost Ark, not Steven Spielberg. So it's all backwards, and I just wanted to debunk that. All right, this is the longest history section we've ever done. I think deservingly so for this movie. But my voice is a little tired from the talking and the COVID. So, Sean, let's transition. Let's talk about Castle of Cagliostro. When we're done with this movie, we'll move over to the Greatest Capers episodes. But let's dive deeper and talk about what makes this movie so great and interesting and strange.
Yeah, I mean, like I said at the top of the podcast, for me, the thing about this movie that's fascinating, and it's true of the two other episodes as well, is that there's this weird sort of collision of Lupin III as like this source material and Miyazaki as this burgeoning director who has like a very clear style that he is developing and honing and like instincts in things that he wants to get out. And I don't think in terms of Miyazaki's narrative sensibilities in the narrative sensibilities of the Lupin franchise, I don't think there's a lot of like synergy between those two elements. But there is a lot of synergy in the like style of Miyazaki's animation and the style of Lupin III. And that's where I think like it does like coincide really well, because what Cagliostro is at its core is it's an action adventure movie. There's like not much in terms of like deep characterization going on here. The movie doesn't feel particularly interested in like exploring a character arc for any of the major characters in a way that's like very detailed. It's not using the Lupin gang in a particularly like in-depth way, which is very different than Mamo, right? Mamo as a film was like fundamentally about Lupin as a character. We talked about that with that movie, that like everything about that story was about trying to peel back the layers of who Lupin is as a person. Lupin doesn't have a character arc per se, because he as a character doesn't change. He's kind of a Sherlock Holmes-esque character in that he has to be too formidable to be someone who changes. So instead, like those kinds of character-based stories are more about peeling back the layers and getting at like the essence of who he is as a person. And I don't think like Cagliostro to me doesn't really have that quality. It doesn't have that interest. What it wants to do is like have this big sweeping adventure story about a dashing hero. And so that is what Lupin is he becomes like the most heroic he is in any Lupin thing we have looked at so far. Like he is just sort of, he is a hero. He's the good guy. He's the guy who sweeps in and saves the princess from the castle. And the movie's not trying to like complicate that. It's not trying to sort of investigate that. It's not trying to rip that apart in any way. It is like an extremely earnest adventure movie in that respect. And that is to me like both the movie's like greatest strength and I think like its most notable weakness is like I do kind of wish there was a little bit more, particularly as like someone who's come to really enjoy the kind of more adult, mature, and weird parts of the Lupin stories we've watched so far. That like there's a certain something that's missing a bit, where I personally I think prefer Mamo's approach as a film, but that earnestness and that straightforward element of the film is also like the thing that makes it so sharp. It makes it like the fastest 100 minutes of a movie you have ever watched, because it just moves and moves and moves and flows so well. Not the sense that it's like got a breakneck pace. It has slower moments. It stops. It has humor. It has a variety. It's not like a one-tone film. But it just feels like it has such a clear vision of the kind of classic adventure story it wants to tell, and the person at the center of it being the dashing hero. And it executes that kind of story at just like a masterful level.
Yeah, I basically agree with most of that. And I do think like on the level of and the other word I would add here is romance. It is a romantic movie. It is not a romantic in the sense that he like kisses the girl and they go live together at the end. But
it's a chivalric romance, fundamentally.
Yes.
That's where those kinds of stories come from. He is a knight-esque figure, and I think like the castle imagery is not a mistake in the role it plays in that as this errant knight rescuing the princess from a foreign castle is a, very Arthurian kind of thing. This dude might as well be fucking Gawain.
Yes, well, absolutely. And that is very much what's there. And I think in that vein, this is, I think, as good a movie as has ever been made on like that kind of topic. And I think it is, and with that kind of action adventure bent, it is one of my favorite movies ever because of that. I would just add, I agree this movie does not like interrogate Lupin's internality the way Mamo does. It certainly does not do that with the gang. And it's almost like you almost can't like criticize the movie for it because it's not trying. Like it's very clearly like its goals are different. But like I do think there is something about the atmosphere of this movie and the way it sort of what it does do with Lupin of having this kind of Miyazaki's take is having the character be not so much visibly, but in the narrative, a bit older, a bit more like, calmed down. There's a flashback that uses redrawn imagery from part one, like Lupin running through the spotlights and vacuuming up all the jewels to kind of like play with the idea of maybe this is an older version of the character than what we've seen in other media, and he's calmed down a bit. And there's a little bit of a nostalgic feeling to it of kind of looking back and feeling the world move past you a little bit. And it's a lot of stuff that is not necessarily spoken or in the narrative. It's just, I think, in these little in-between moments. It's in certain animation choices. As breakneck as the movie is, it is also very good at slowing down and having moments where you just breathe in the atmosphere. One of those moments is you have one of the most amazing car chases in movie history, and then you have Lupin and Clarice holding on to the rope. But between those two scenes, there's just a little moment of like surveying the damage of the car having fallen down and letting the water kind of like lap on the shore and then pan up and find them. And there's a lot of moments like that. There's the scenes in the old abandoned castle where Clarice's parents lived, that there's this whole long sequence that is Lupin just walking around this area that we later learn he has been before. And he is kind of basking in the nostalgia and seeing the gap between him as a young man and an older man and kind of like thinking about that. And I think all of that is beautiful. And I think the ending of this movie is one of my favorite movie endings of all time, of him wanting to have this adventurous life with Clarice, where she says she wants to come join the gang. And there is the best moment of character animation, I think, in this movie and in a lot of movies, of Lupin resisting the urge to do that and eventually like making the chivalric choice to tell her to stay while he runs and is back in his mode with Zenigata and the chase. And I think all of that is where this movie does elevate a little bit beyond, quote unquote, just an adventure movie. Not that there's anything just about that, because it's still a big achievement. And that stuff, it touches me. It's always touched me. I think the other thing that struck me this time, the biggest thing for me, having watched a bunch of Lupin in order up to this point, Yasuo Yamada is unreal in this movie. He is on another level. He not only has all the fun sing-songy Lupin voice that we love from part 2 that he has developed, over time, but when Miyazaki asks him to go quieter and go more serious and go more nostalgic and more reflective, he just breaks me in moments of this movie where he will like, there's that scene where he's like walking through the abandoned castle and he looks at the ring and says, "You've grown up," as he's looking at it. And it is just this little line that is just, he puts so much feeling into when he narrates the flashback near the end of him having been here before. The like level of humanity and kind of like introspection he's able to blend into the voice of this character who is not usually that introspective. He's just one of the greatest actors in anime history, and I think this is one of his finest hours. So there's that kind of stuff that just like on an emotive level actually really does get me in this movie, and always has.
Yeah, I think like it probably didn't, that side of it, I do think is there in the story. I don't think it hit me as hard, partially because since it's my first time watching it, like, that the contextualizing of all that stuff at that midpoint with the big flashback scene, I think makes it so that it doesn't register as clearly, right? Because Lupin doesn't go on an arc where you see that he has been reckless and now he has gotten older and he's tried to move past that life. I think the sense that he is trying to move past that life only becomes clear at the midpoint. And before that, it's very easy to read most of the movie as like, this is just another Lupin adventure, because it does open up with him doing a big casino heist, right? That is just like sort of a classic Lupin heist thing. That's like the very opening of the movie, that then they learn, this is like it's the Gothic counterfeit bills, which I love the idea that apparently like the Visigoths have been secretly counterfeiting money throughout all of history. This is just like
let's put a pin in that. We will definitely talk about that. It's
a great weird subplot that runs throughout this whole film. And I think like the vibes of the movie, I do think like are hitting on the level that you're talking about, but like narratively, it didn't really kind of click together for me in a way that felt really strong. I think that stuff would probably land better on a rewatch, kind of knowing that that's more what the movie's going for. But on my first viewing, there felt like a weird disconnect of, I wasn't entirely sure like what are you doing with Lupin as a character? Like, is he the person he was, or is he older and has he grown beyond these things? Is a thing that isn't fully clear to me. Also because of the way the movie ends, felt kind of hollow, of like, I just kind of don't really get why Zenigata is chasing him anymore. I don't really get like what relationship he has with Fujiko anymore. I feel like the movie doesn't really commit to the idea that this is an older Lupin. It more is kind of playing with that idea in the background, but it doesn't feel like it's not like how I wouldn't pitch it to people. It's like, oh, this is about an older Lupin who's grown beyond this, like in the way that Logan is about an older Wolverine or something, you know. It's sort of half doing it and half not.
I think that's fair. I think for me, that is also kind of part of the appeal. I love that it is a softer background element of, it's like Lupin himself, I think, is surprised. And I think you see this, the character animation is just so precise. And I agree with you completely that I think this is something that requires multiple viewings. And again, I have no memory of when I first saw this movie. So I've seen it, this is like 6, 7 times, who knows how many times, right? But like, I do think you see it of like, I think he's a little surprised at how emotionally involved he gets in this adventure, because fundamentally he is still what he is. His life is he and Jigen on the road. This is like, to me, one of the defining Lupin moments of all time is the opening credits of this movie, is him and Jigen on the road. Like, if anything, I think marries Miyazaki's vision and Monkey Punch's vision. It is that scene of the idea of like these two thieves who live these itinerant lives on the road, but in Miyazaki's vision, he sees sort of the like calm beauty in that versus kind of the like Mad Magazine madcap of that. But like, they're not fundamentally dissimilar, because it is still about these two guys traveling together, smoking under the sun, under the moon, and all of that. So it's this absolutely has worked for me for many years. But I do understand what you're saying, and it is, again, this is always the interesting thing to talk about here, is that this is a Miyazaki movie. This is like a different vision of Lupin, and there's no version of Hayao Miyazaki where he can like hide the things that make him who he is. It's just, he's too much of an auteur to like not have those vocal elements in the film, you know?
Yeah, and it's interesting just because I can't think of another example of this in a different franchise, where like a franchise has like a very clearly established kind of tone and style it works in that is very successful and it's very popular, and then it has this other like director who obviously, like, at the time he was not Hayao Miyazaki, one of the best known animation directors of all time, but like we can look at it now with the context of we understand who he would come to be, having a figure like that kind of enter the orbit of this franchise, make a few like really incredible defining projects, and then leave and go off and make his own career. And so like Castle of Cagliostro is in this weird kind of mid spot where it's like, it definitely is a Lupin movie. You know, when I say this, like, it's, you know, it doesn't have a lot of Lupinness to it. It's not that there's no Lupin elements. You know, you'd have to do like a lot of work to completely remove the Lupin things from the movie and make it a movie that did have no connection to the franchise. So it's like, it is rooted in the Lupin franchise, just much more lightly than other things we've watched. So it is still there, but Miyazaki's style is so strong and is so distinct and is pretty opposed, I think, to a lot of the core Monkey Punch elements. Like, Miyazaki would never make a movie anything like The Mystery of Mamo.
No.
Or like its sort of values and its perspective, you know, that I think is much closer to the kind of the Monkey Punch view. And so it is one of those really fascinating things about this movie is that it is this kind of push and pull between those trends. And I think the movie is trying to incorporate it by contextualizing Lupin the Third Part 1 Lupin as being the past of this version, right? Like down to him having the green jacket, right? We are back to green jacket Lupin, which I think is the best look we've seen so far for Lupin.
Yes.
The green jacket, having been away from it for a while and coming back, it looks real fucking good. And obviously it's a movie, so it gets to look even better. But the movie is trying to deal with and resolve, I think, these tensions that Miyazaki feels like he has with the subject matter. That I think he has this kind of fundamental disagreement, worldview disagreement with what the Monkey Punch Lupin is as a person that exists in like media.
Absolutely. And I think it's a productive tension. I think it's like a fun, interesting thing in these movies that, like, I think the world of anime is richer for this weird marriage having happened, especially because we're at no loss of good Lupin material in the other direction. If Mystery of Mamo is your jam, it exists and it's beautiful, and these movies came out a year apart, which is the silliest, craziest thing I've ever heard of, right? That, like, can you imagine any other franchise releasing two movies as different as The Mystery of Mamo and The Castle of Cagliostro 12 months apart? Has that ever happened? What would that even look like?
Yeah, no, it is ridiculous. Like, they would make the best weird double feature ever because they're made almost at the same time. They're part of the same franchise, but they feel completely different.
Yeah. And I agree with you about the green jacket, by the way. I think coming back to this, like, I understand the appeal of the red jacket. Green jacket Lupin is just, it's the best look. It looks so good. Although, pink jacket, we're doing next week. Maybe we will come around on the pink jacket. Because I do like the idea of Lupin in a big pink sports jacket. It's fucking great. But anyway, yeah. No, it's again, I think it's a productive tension. And I think it's something that it is interesting to have, like, the world of Cagliostro is this, like a lot of Miyazaki movies in this period, it is an Europe, and we see that in Kiki's Delivery Service, I think most obviously. Porco Rosso is a little more specifically Italian. Laputa is sort of a mix of kind of Germanic influences, but it's mostly steampunk. Nausicaa obviously is the future, so it's a very different kind of thing. But, like, just having him kind of walk into this setting, you see that, like, Miyazaki is much more attracted to the gentleman thief aspect of the character, which is also part of Lupin. It is in, Monkey Punch chose Arsène Lupin to base this on for a reason. The joke being Lupin III is more of a punk than his fucking grandpa, right? But, I think it all blends in an interesting way. And yeah, just to give this conversation a little more direction, I do want to talk about the opening scenes of this movie, because before you're out of the opening credits of this film, you have some of my favorite movie images of ever. You have Lupin and Jigen doing the big jumps as they are running away from the casino, where Yuji Ono does this little sting on the soundtrack, and they bring that back in episode 145, which is great, where they're running handcuffed together, or foot cuffed. You have their little fucking jalopy Fiat car stuffed with bills that they're, like, swimming in. You have the money floating away in the breeze when they throw it away. And then those opening credits with the song Fire Treasure, which is the big original song for this movie, of Lupin and Jigen traveling, particularly the closing images of them smoking on the car at night before they head out again, which is the key art of this season of Japanimation Station for a reason. It's in my bones. I love these images so much. This movie gets off to one hell of a start.
Yeah, and I particularly love the way that Lupin and Jigen's relationship is depicted in the first 30 minutes or so. Basically, everything up to once they start infiltrating the castle, at which point Jigen obviously kind of becomes a much more background figure, where he's just sort of waiting to be able to use his giant anti-tank rifle he got from somewhere, which is very good. Yes. But I love the sort of, like, quiet trust, that Jigen has in Lupin, but also that Jigen detects that there's something more is going on as the different pieces of the plot start falling into place, which starts being introduced with the discovery of that these are counterfeit bills that they've heisted from the casino, and then they meet the girl, and then it's the ring and all this stuff, and Jigen's sort of slowly seeing that there's more to what's going on to Lupin than just another heist. It's a great intro to the movie, where it gives you that feeling that this isn't just another episode of Lupin the Third, that this is a Lupin movie. You talked about how there was an earlier script before Miyazaki got involved, that the criticism that Yasuosuke had for it was that it just felt like another TV episode. And I think that's one of the key things that Cagliostro does to avoid that problem, is that it eases you in like, hey, this is just another Lupin adventure. Even, before the girl gets introduced, I think the setup of, oh, we heisted something, but then found out it's counterfeit, and then we're going to track out down the counterfeiter, is a plotline of a bunch of different Lupin episodes, or like something similar has happened in a bunch of different Lupin episodes already. So it like is teasing you in to that sort of basic Lupin heist concept and what feels like could be the intro to an episode of part 2. And then once Clarice enters the scene, it becomes clear that Lupin is much more invested, and Jigen starts to tease that out with the audience. I think this is just like a really great structure for your first act.
Absolutely. And I think it's interesting. We also talked about how Mystery of Mamo is just so explosive in feeling like a movie because it's globetrotting, and like Mamo has like 20 fucking like countries they go to, and it's constant action and stuff. And Cagliostro, as madcap as it is a much softer film, but I like that it also comes to feel like this is a Lupin movie in that way. And I like seeing how the two films feel like film events. They just come at it from a different direction. So yeah, all of that is beautiful. And those opening credits, I know I've already mentioned them, but they are one of the most famous like pieces of Lupin, and they are really beautiful. They were very mangled in most English presentations because I guess TMS never gave them like a credits-less version of it, which does exist. It's on the discotheque versions and on the Japanese release, you can see it. So what would often happen is that studios would basically like take a screenshot and then just put English text over it, and it would just ruin those images because they really are gorgeous. And then I do want to mention the soundtrack, by the way, before we get away from that. You have Fire Treasure in that first scene. It's obviously the main motif of the movie. Most of the music in Cagliostro is reused from the TV show. Not unusual, but more so than Mystery of Mama, which did bring more original music to the table because Yuji Ono had more time to work on it. This is also, we should say, much later in the run of Part 2. This is less than a year before Part 2 ends. So, for instance, the big car chase in the first act is scored to the fourth theme song, because that would have basically just started airing on the TV show when Yuji Ono came to work on the movie. It is a gorgeous soundtrack. I think it's like Yuji Ono's instincts for where to use the music and how to deploy it, and he does some different cuts with it and whatnot. It's still a beautiful and iconic soundtrack, but this one just is less of like new material that would then go in the show. Fire Treasure is only used once in Part 2, and it is in episode 155.
Yeah, no, it is a very good soundtrack, even if it is very familiar. And I did really like whenever, because there's a couple of times that a different version of the theme song pops up. Like the fullest one is that car chase, but then there's like a couple of kind of stings where they use the theme song. And I'm a sucker for that anytime something like that happens. You get a good iconic theme song, you gotta pepper that thing throughout your movie. It's just the rules. It has to happen.
Speaking of that car chase, Sean, it's one of the greatest things in animation history, and we got to talk about it. Again, we talked about earlier, Kazuhide Tomonaga was the lead animator here. I think I've rewatched that car chase like 10 times this weekend just to try to wrap my head around everything that is going on. The speed of it, the fluidity of the motion, the way the cars are a little bit rubbery, the way the car, Lupin and Jigen's car goes up over the cliff, and then you have, I think the best animated shot in the whole movie might be Jigen reloading his gun while he's talking as they're coming back down, which is like the amount of motion in Jigen's body and on the gun in that shot is mind-boggling. But like that whole scene, and like one of the things is the perspective of it. There are shots in there that if you did it today, you would absolutely be doing with like 3D, like UFO table style. But they just figured out how to fucking draw it. The way the camera like comes in and around the cars as they're moving. It's one of the most elaborate sequences I've ever seen.
Yeah, it's really incredible. I think probably my favorite sequence of shots is what you're just talking about, where they go up, they go like cut through these like woods basically, which all that stuff just looks fucking great. Like there's a shot from within the car when they're cutting through the woods, and then you get, as you're saying, the shot of Jigen loading some sort of magic revolver bullet or something that can blow up the tires of the car as they come down, which made me think about their silly the dum-dum bullets from that one weird episode of Lupin the Third Part 2. But yeah, no, it's amazing. It is Lupin the Third is this movie, it is the car chase and Mystery of Mamo, and then we have that one car chase at the beginning of episode 99. That's just like, those three are like the three best car chases I've ever seen in anime. Like, it's just, they're so good. Obviously, it is like a particular feature of Lupin that it is getting all these people like Yasuo Otsuka at this kind of prime of their career that are really interested in automobiles in that world, and then like bringing that to what they're doing with the animation. It's just so incredible, especially looking back at it now when we are very much in a world where, particularly for a TV anime, although even with a movie, you're almost always going to get this done in CG. Like, specifically, the cars are going to be done in CG because it is incredibly difficult to draw and animate cars like this. It is one of those things where it's like rigid body objects like that are very geometrically complex. It is so much easier to do that kind of shit in 3D. And these kinds of sequences have become more and more impressive to me as time goes on, because these kinds of sequences have become rarer and rarer in the animation industry in general.
And I think the skill set has not disappeared, but like younger animators probably are just going to be less interested in drawing cars. One, because they've grown up in a world where cars don't look as interesting. Like Yasuo Otsuka grew up with fucking 1950s cars. He loves the look of cars. Like, if you're growing up in the 2000s or the 1990s, why would you be interested in cars? You're going to draw a Honda Civic? Like, what are you drawing, right? But like, they, these guys at this period were fascinated with these things, and understandably so. So yeah, it's Lupin the Third has the best car chases ever, and this is one of them. There's no right answer to which one is the best. They're all amazing, but this one is definitely a fucking treat.
There's nothing quite as outlandish as the fucking railing getting ripped off and then skating on the railing in Mamo, which is like, I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it's like there's a more kind of grounded, less Looney Tunes quality to the car chase in Cagliostro, which I appreciate. I like both flavors. Both give me the like insane physics-defying antics, and then also give me the like, it's not that it's all perfectly physically real, but it is more, it's exaggerated. It's not made ridiculous, and that's, I think, kind of the way a lot of the animation feels in this movie. Is it is fairly grounded, with just pushed a little bit extra to emphasize things, which is what I think Miyazaki's animation style in general kind of feels like.
Especially in this period, because I was also, last week, I was teaching for my film theory class, I was teaching the film Laputa, Castle in the Sky, and there's a lot of affinity between those two, as those are Miyazaki's two best adventure films, and, there is, like, I think, as I said, affinity between sort of that. It's not as crazy as Mamo, but it is heightened enough that it's just a little, you lean forward because you're so fascinated with how these, vehicles and people are moving. And I really, really love that. I think, Miyazaki's sense of momentum in action is roughly unparalleled. And I think you see that in the episodes we're going to talk about later as well, particularly the Albatross one, which has a series of cuts involving Fujiko that might be the best thing we talk about this season. But yeah, it's all incredible. Speaking about the story of this movie, I did want to double back a second, Sean, about the Bills. One thing to note, most fans will probably know the Bills as the Goat Bills, because that is how they were subtitled forever. My Japanese Blu-ray from Studio Ghibli calls them Goat Bills. In the dubs, they call them Goat Bills. They are... Discotek made the choice that is probably much more accurate, and there's a whole description of this on the Blu-ray, of calling them Gothic Bills, because the whole idea is that the Cagliostros are descended from the Visigoths. But what has confused people for years to calling them Goat Bills is because Goto sounds like that in Japanese, and then there's all this goat imagery over the movie. Those two things are actually unrelated, but I do think it's an interesting thing about what has fooled translators over the years into calling them the Goat Bills and all of this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's very understandable why you would make that mistake, because it is like, because, the use of the Goths or the Visigoths in the plotline is so very loose. It's just this sort of like, oh yeah, there's just like this secret group of the Goths that historically controlled all of world events by counterfeiting currency. And it's just like, okay. But I think one of the things that makes it more clear that it is supposed to be the Goths is the reveal of the Roman city at the end. I think like helps sort of even though again everything becomes fucking weird because of how there's like a bunch of shit in the movie that feels like it's supposed to be set in Sweden until all of a sudden it feels like it's set in Italy, and then you're like, I'm confused about where in Europe this is supposed to be. But if like, okay, the Roman city, the Romans conquered the Goths, okay, that starts to make some amount of sense, I guess. And it's Cagliostro, it's Italian.
Right.
The title of the movie has an Italian name in it, so it's going to be Italy. I don't care how many fucking Gustavs and like snowy mountain Swedish peaks you've got around here. It's got to be Italy, damn it.
It's very weird, but I do like the entire plot of the idea of there's these perfect counterfeits, so they're going to go investigate them and find this entire kingdom built on counterfeit bills, which ultimately isn't even really what the movie is quite about, although it does give Zenigata his motivation in the second half, which is very good. There's a lot of good stuff there in the second half about that. So it's I like that whole plot element, but what it really is about, and that whole car chase is about, is Clarice, who is the princess of this kingdom, who her parents were presumably killed by Count Cagliostro when he burned this whole thing down, and she went off and became a nun for a while, but is now back from the convent to marry Count Cagliostro, although she very much does not want to do that, and so our chivalric hero Lupin comes in to save the day. In their first meeting here after the car chase, I also wanted to note the weirdness. Lupin has like a Batman belt in this movie. I didn't like notice that until this time, but he has like a gadget belt, and he's doing that when they're hanging on the side of the cliff. He's literally he wheels them down because he has this little crank on his belt. There's the scene on the tower where he is trying to like launch this little rocket, and it ultimately doesn't work, and it ends up with that big jumping sequence that's so iconic. But I like that Lupin is like using gadgets in this movie.
Yes, I love his weird little utility belt. I found the physics of that little tiny crank he has on his belt buckle, and the idea of like, you know, in the real world, how insanely fast you'd have to crank that thing to be able to see any kind of effect. It's so small that I really wish that he just was like going at that thing like an absolute motherfucker, just barely moving on that wire, because it makes no sense. But yeah, his weird, wacky gadgets are very fun, and yeah, all the kind of hijinks he gets into with his weird gadgets is great.
Yeah. But why don't we, Sean, talk about Clarice and kind of that central relationship of the film. Obviously, this is significant of being Sumi Shimamoto, who would go on to voice Nausicaa and a lot of other characters. She's a long-running... She's still doing voice work, I saw, once in a while. You'll notice a lot of directors in kind of the Miyazaki mold, like Makoto Shinkai and Mamoru Hosoda, will cast her as like the mom or something in a lot of their movies, almost as I think a nod to this period of anime. But yeah, your main sort of relationship here is those two, and there are some very iconic scenes between them. Yeah,
and she's also, I just have to shout her out for she is the voice of Otonashi Kyoko, the main character in Maison Ikkoku, which is one of my favorite anime it's the Rumiko Takahashi manga from the 80s. That's like one of the best rom-com animes ever.
Right.
But yes, great actress. Obviously a very early performance for her in this movie. But yeah, I mean, she very much feels like the character Clarice is your archetype of the Miyazaki girl. Like it's kind of hard not to just see it that way, because it feels so... It is the thing about Miyazaki's style that I find the most hilarious is his insistence on giving women bob cuts. And I'm convinced the only reason why Fujiko is allowed to have a longer haircut for stretches of this movie is because Clarice is in the film to take the bob cut quota so that Fujiko can have longer hair. Because as soon as you have an episode that doesn't have a Clarice, like episode 145, which we'll talk about, all of a sudden Fujiko has to have a short haircut again. Like what he did in part 1. So there's I don't know if anyone's written this essay. I don't know if anyone's asked him, like, what is his obsession with it? Is it a weird, like, fetish thing? It's like, what's going on? Why do you have a fixation on it? But all of his young women, particularly from the earlier period in his work, man, they all look the exact same.
I mean, This is true of a lot of animators, obviously.
It's true,
and
yes.
a lot of, every girl in One Piece looks like Nami for the first, 15 years, and then it eventually branches out. There's a lot of animators who do this. The bob cut thing, I like the idea of it being a fetish. It's a much more gentle fetish than, Tarantino and his feet or something. It's bob cut is fine. Nothing wrong with a bob cut. I think the main thing is it's easy to animate and looks in motion. You can just give it that little bit of physics, and it's easier than longer flowing hair. But yeah, I think most clearly Clarice is a predecessor to Sheeta in Castle in the Sky. She feels a lot like that character of someone who is, literally it's almost the same story of Sheeta is also like an heir to in that case, the Laputa kingdom. And, Pazu is the one who sort of, there's a little more of an equal footing for them because they are both children, and she's a little more active in the story in that one. But yes, you're absolutely, and Nausicaa obviously is a much, much more active character than Clarice is. But yeah, I think the scene where Lupin, infiltrates the tower and talks to Clarice, and there is the extremely famous image of him getting down on one knee and giving her the flower, that he then does this little magic trick of all the little flags on the little, string. That is obviously an extremely famous scene, and I think one of the best scenes in the movie. The whole part where he's in the shadows and she says, "Who are you?" And he says, "Dorobo," and comes out of the shadows saying, "I'm the thief." And there's the whole trust in the thief line, and he gives her this whole, spiel that is basically him trying to get her to believe in and trust him again and have some hope. And all of that, Yasuo Yamada is so fucking fantastic. Where is this a 5,000 times more chivalric version of Lupin than we've ever seen before? Yes. Does Yasuo Yamada sell it and make it work? Also, yes. And I think there's a real beauty to that scene where you get swept up in the romanticism of it.
Yeah, I think it goes a little far for me, I will have to say. I do think Yasuo Yamada sells it incredibly well, but it's just, if I can't read the song of Lupin is a nice man as sarcastic, I feel like you're a little bit too off. He's too much of a nice guy this time. But yeah, it works for this movie. It works for what they're doing with the character, even if it's not quite like what I've come to like about the other versions of Lupin we've watched. But obviously, yes, it is an incredibly famous scene. I somehow I must have seen that scene somewhere, because I remembered the dialogue, and I as soon as you started playing, I'm I have definitely seen this. I don't know if I flipped past it on a TV. I don't know if it was in B-roll in a documentary or something I watched at some point. But yes, that scene of him entering her chambers and the magic trick and all that is it's a really good example of where this movie, when we, I think it's easy to get wrapped up in how good the animation is in motion with the big action scenes and stuff like the car chase, which is obviously really true. But the thing that makes this movie exceptional is that it is the animation in those moments, and it's the way that those sequences are directed and storyboarded that are much more quiet, but just as much of effort and energy and time is put into thinking about how do we stage the scene, how we stage the characters, how do we animate their movements and their expressions in order to make this scene really work. And then that scene culminates in what is my favorite shot in the movie, at the very end, where Lupin is standing there with his hands in his pockets, and the Count activates the trap door, and the trap door goes out from under Lupin. Lupin doesn't move at all. Obviously his clothes and stuff have good secondary motion on them as he starts to fall, and the camera moves forward and pivots and looks down the pit as Lupin goes straight down. That is a fucking amazing shot of animation.
Yes. I wrote in my notes, boy, this Lupin is a fucking badass, because just the he just is staring unflinching as the Count drops him seemingly to his death. Lupin also is just this is the confident trickster version of Lupin in a lot of this. His whole, everything he does at the wedding at the end of the movie, obviously. You are absolutely right. That shot is incredible. I also think parts of this sort of chivalric Lupin have shown up in unexpected places. This movie, I think, was a pretty big influence on Mari Okada for The Woman Called Fujiko Mine, mainly in Fujiko's characterization, which we'll talk about in a minute. But I also think there's a little bit of that show is mostly closer to the manga in kind of its anarchic spirit, but I think there are scenes where Lupin gets interested in Fujiko on a more selfless level of she's a person in trouble and he has a little bit of a chivalric instinct in him for her. And I think there are moments, particularly in the finale of that series, that remind me of some stuff that happens in this. And and of course, this movie is going to be, at least in some part, influential on most future Lupin for the reasons we've talked about before. But that is one scene I think about there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think for like that thing with Lupin's characterization, I think for me, the thing that feels like a disconnect from how the character is typically portrayed that makes him feel overtly heroic is that his motivation in this movie purely is to rescue Clarice. Like, as soon as the Clarice thing enters the picture, like all the rest of it, the counterfeiting, none of that, not only does that not interest Lupin, it doesn't come up. He doesn't even like offer it as this is the reason why I'm going to say I'm infiltrating the castle, even if the real reason is why I want to save Clarice. And I think that for me is like the fundamental difference. He is openly heroic and gentlemanly and chivalric in this film in a way that typically Lupin, either he's a bastard, which we saw in like some of the early part 1 stuff, or in like Mamo, they kind of go with that where it's like, he is not a nice guy. Like there's a lot of shit about him that's pretty bad. Even if you can't help but love him kind of thing. But typically what we saw in a lot of part 1 and especially in part 2 is that underneath it all, he does have a really good heart and he is going to try to help people. When he's going around thieving stuff, he's not doing it to hurt anybody. He's not using violence. He's not trying to shoot random people or innocent people or anything like that. He's trying to have a good time, and that's what he cares about. But if something happens that and he's going to help people in need, but he's never going to be like magnanimous about it. He's never going to be open about it. He's never going to be honest about it. It's always going to be shrouded in something related to his thievery and something related to the heist. And then underneath it all, he's really like trying to help this little girl with the stamp. That's a really good example is that episode from part 2 with the stamp, where at the end you get that sense of how much he does actually kind of has enjoyed this girl and cares about her, and he sends her the little stamp. But throughout it, he's not being he's not being this level of gentlemanly about it. He's trying to get rid of her for most of it, even if you know that he kind of likes being around the girl. That's the kind of thing that I think is the difference, is that there's a fundamental honesty to Lupin and what he's trying to do here that feels very different than how the character has typically been portrayed.
Yeah. And I think that's a really good way to put it. And I think that is kind of the key difference, because even the big scene when he sends the card to the Count of like, I'm going to come steal Clarice, it is not, I'm going to come steal your counterfeit bills. And if I get my hands on your princess, that'll happen too. It is this, like a scene that I have to imagine was an influence on Persona 5. Is like him sending the note. It is like this. I know Persona 5 is also...
Well, yeah, I mean, the calling card thing is that comes from the classic Lupin stories, but...
It does, but there's like... It is the calling card to the villain to make him act a certain way, but with a clearly heroic intent. Like, the way he writes it is like, I'm going to reveal your whole shit, right? Like, I'm going to tear down your kingdom. And there's something about that just... I don't know. It's obviously, they're pulling from the same set of resources, but I think there's something about that where I half expect fucking Morgana to pop up and the theme song to start playing from Persona 5 as they go into fucking Mementos to start the process,
Sure.
But no, it's fun. Yeah, so all of that, absolutely. So one other thing just on the Clarice scene, we're kind of jumping around the movie here and there's a lot we could talk about. I do want to mention the entire infiltration of the castle before the big scene with Clarice, because that's one of my favorite scenes in the movie, and there's a couple of cuts there that blow me away. One, just on this, to start out, Jigen and Lupin go in with their fucking wetsuits, and Jigen keeps his hat on. And that is one of my favorite images in this movie. He has the beard sticking out of the wetsuit, and he still keeps his hat. And they're very good about him, like, continually, there's no way that hat would stay on, but he keeps, like, grabbing it and losing it throughout that whole sequence. And I just love that Daisuke Jigen, he does not go into the water without his fucking cool hat.
Yeah, and then there's the great scene of where Lupin starts getting swept away and he's like desperately trying to swim up the waterfall.
Yes.
That is a very good, like, straight out of Wile E. Coyote kind of Looney Tunes animation that happens there.
I'm really glad you brought that up. It's one of my favorite cuts in any Miyazaki animation. Because what I love is he does ultimately lose to gravity, but like the struggle is so crazy and the physics of it obviously wouldn't work. He couldn't actually do that swim, but the way he does it is like so well animated that you buy into the reality of it. And there's I think this is the argument that I think it was Reed Nelson in the liner notes made with in episode 151 of part 2, which we watched, the truck chase one. But there's that scene where the car is like the cliff is falling apart and the car manages to get up it anyway. I think the same animator did that and this scene, and it's almost like a sequel to that moment of, instead of Lupin swimming up, it's the car like trying to go up this falling cliff. And I love those moments where something physically kind of impossible happens through sheer effort. It's a really cool cut.
Yeah, but I think the reason why the cut in this movie works so well is because they hold on it for so long, and show like how hard it is as Lupin's trying to fight it, to the point where they hold on it long enough that your instinct is, oh, he's going to have to make it. Because if it was just going to be that he's going to fall, they wouldn't have spent them this much time on it. And so you think he's about to make it, and then he ultimately loses. And I think it's just like the way it kind of plays with your expectation with how you've seen these kinds of scenes done in other cartoons before. It's really good. And obviously just all the technical quality of the animation is exceptionally high, but it's the way that whole sequence is staged to play with your kind of Looney Tunes logic, I think, is very good.
Yeah, and then what happens when Lupin fails and he falls is he goes through all the gears in like the aqueduct clockwork, which totally feels like it's an homage to Charlie Chaplin's Modern Times, which has a scene where he gets through the gears in it's a scene in Modern Times that kind of looks animated because it wasn't, but it was this like weird hybrid live action stop motion. And I really love that. And then there's so many good scenes here, but the next whole sequence is all about him and Zenigata. And I love that Zenigata, where he and his men are all eating cup ramen out of mugs, which is a great little touch. And Zenigata has a sense. He looks up at the aqueduct tower and he goes, "Where does that come out?" And they tell him, he's like, okay, Lupin's going to be up there. And it's a great Zenigata moment. I love whenever Zenigata just completely has Lupin's number. And he goes up there, and there's that great shot where he's looking at the exact spot where Lupin is hiding in the water. But you see Zenigata's face through the water, and it's all like distorted and swimmy, which kind of makes me think of shots much later in Miyazaki's career in Ponyo. And I love that whole image, and that entire idea is really fun.
Yeah, all that stuff is great. I mean, that shot, my favorite part of that shot is if you look, Zenigata's got his massive, ridiculous chin, and like just this one little part of his chin is actually like in the stream of water. So you can see that really clearly because it's poking through, but the rest of his face is distorted. Yeah, that's a really great shot. But all that stuff as Zenigata is introduced at this section of the movie while Lupin is infiltrating is phenomenal. I love the way that they have really sort of specifically centered Zenigata and his crew as police officers working with Interpol, but they're all from Japan. And specifically, they're like Saitama prefectural police, because that's like what is on all their cars. And there's like a specificity to it that I find hilarious. There's, like Cagliostro, the Count of Cagliostro is like openly racist towards them, which I think is like an interesting sort of mix here with, then also you see like all the kind of the politicking at Interpol. And I think it's interesting that they really center Zenigata as being a Japanese policeman, which is a thing that it would usually come up in one line of dialogue in Lupin the Third Part 2, and then it just kind of, they just kind of ignore it. Like it's never sort of centers in his like identity or in the story in the way that obviously like Goemon is very specifically a Japanese person because that's his whole shtick. Zenigata, that it's usually not as sort of front and center, but I like the way that they sort of contrast his Japanese identity, the Japanese identity of his men with like the European setting they're in. And the best example of that is all of them sitting outside while the party is happening, and they're all like slurping cup noodles in like the cold at night. It's just really, it's a very fun way to frame all of those characters. And I also like that Zenigata has this like massive crew of men who are with him that clearly all believe in Zenigata, in his mission, in the pursuit of justice against the villain Lupin. Even though Lupin is like the most heroic person in the fucking world in this movie, they're still hell bent on capturing this guy. And I like that he's got his whole crew with him in this movie. I think it's cool.
Zenigata, every scenario, I don't think we've ever seen a scenario where they didn't manage to make Zenigata work. He is like the most plastic character in Lupin in Lupin's entire universe. And it's another one. I also really love Miyazaki's and Otsuka's design of Zenigata here, which then gets used in the later Part 2 episodes. It's not, and this is true of all of them, it's other than Fujiko, it's not that different, but like it's just refined a little bit, where like his face has a few more features. It's like the shape of his face is a little more exaggerated. I really love how he's drawn in this film and then in the later episodes as well.
Yes, I think I commented on it in that episode for Part 2 we talked about, but he's prettier. He's just he's cleaned up a little bit. He's just a bit more kind of stoic and kind of put together in the way he looks.
Yeah. Because you also have the chase here where Lupin, this is just a great Looney Tunes moment, where Lupin dresses up as Zenigata, runs up to the guards and says, "Hey guys, watch out, Zenigata is Lupin in disguise." And then he gets the palace guards to go after the real Zenigata, but then they are running so fast, they sweep up Lupin into them, and they're all running together on the stairs. It's one of those moments where you just have a bajillion bodies on screen, and they're all moving, and it's a hilarious, like, piece of physical comedy.
Yeah, all that stuff is fun. And then I think particularly the whole gimmick of there's the statue that you have to like turn the head to deactivate the trap door. And when the trap door goes off, the lights of the statue take a picture of you and all that. And of course, Lupin tricks Gustave into falling into the pit and all that stuff. That whole sequence is phenomenal.
Yep. And then you get Lupin climbing the North Tower and all the stuff on the roofs that culminates in the big jump Lupin does over the like chasms of the Cagliostro Castle. And that to me is one of the defining moments of Miyazaki's career. It is one of those go-to images I think of whenever Miyazaki's name comes to mind. It is in the Japanimation Station theme song, the original version and this season's version. I originally put it where like my name went in the theme song because I love it so much. But it's not just that big jump. It's all the climbing he does, the performance of Lupin's body by the animators of him climbing up the tower, and then the way that sequence builds where he has all this careful planning and effort with his dumb little rocket and this fiddly animation as he's trying to get that to work. And then it culminates in this crazy bit of happenstance and accident of him falling, which turns into him running, which turns into him just going for it and doing this leap across this impossible gap. And the way Lupin's body like gradually leans into the like effort of it is just such a cool piece of animation. I love it to death.
Yeah, and in particular, I think it's, for me, it's all the fiddly bits before it. It's the when the rocket falls and he holds onto the string to try to hold it up, but the string is like unspooling because the whole point is that it's going to be like a rope that he's using and stuff when it launches, so it's not actually like attached, so it starts to unspool. So he's like, oh shit, and he has to like fumble to try to grab the thing, and then all the wires tangled up, and then he falls, and then that whole sequence happens. And yeah, it's a lot like the thing we're just talking about with the waterfall, where they spend enough time on him setting up the rocket that you think the payoff has to be that the rocket has to work somehow, or either it's going to get him across, or it's going to cause something crazy to happen. There's going to be another chase or something. But I think it's just like this kind of pulls the rug out from under you, where you're so focused on the rocket because they spent so much time on all the fiddly bits of setting it up that the fact that it kind of goes in the background in his real solution for getting across doesn't use it at all. There's a like naturalism to the way that sequence plays out because it gives you this clear narrative setup that it doesn't actually pay off in any way. It's just very clever. I think it's the way that all those little kinds of sequences are played out feel so inventive because of that. None of them play out exactly the way you expect them to. And when you've watched a lot of animation, particularly in this style, and you've watched Looney Tunes cartoons, you've watched the other Lupin stuff or anything like that, you just have such a sense of how these kinds of sequences go. And, things can be very predictable in that way and still be very entertaining. But I think it says a lot when a creator can find a way to set up those sequences and then pay them off in ways that you really can't see coming.
I also just love the parallelism of the movie starts with Lupin and Jigen doing these jumps over the cars. Mm-hmm. And Yuji Ono does that little sting of the like, dua, dua, as they're like jumping. And then he brings it back here, where when he does this incredible, impossible jump, and he jumps and is soaring, and then he lands and does this little like pirouette jump off of the second tower, which is such a insane thing. Like it's like he obviously couldn't do that in a million ways. It's like there's a trampoline on there somehow. But like the music sting and the fact that we've seen this motion before all just makes it so kind of poetic, and you just breathe with it. I love it.
Yeah, and it's that sense of momentum you talked about with Miyazaki's animation before that I think really sells it, because obviously in a realistic setting this thing would not work because he would lose all of his upwards momentum. That's not how momentum works. Is, you know, once gravity has moved against you, you're fucked. But there's like a instinctive logic to like he can keep springing because he's jumped so high. When he comes down, he can come back just as high, like it's a trampoline. There's a cartoon logic to it that I think fundamentally works because of the way the movement has been animated, the momentum is maintained across that run down the roof through the jumps.
One other note, Yasuo Yamada has this wah he does while Lupin is running, that you could pull that out and put that in a Mario game and you would not skip a beat. You would go, oh, Yasuo Yamada has replaced Charles Martinet, and it's perfect. It's such a good wah. And I had never quite realized it before, but I was listening to the movie with my nice headphones, and it's just there in the mix enough. I fucking love it.
I noticed it as well. Yes, it is a very Mario voice he makes.
Man, Yasuo Yamada, we've only got 2 episodes left, Sean, of Yasuo Yamada Lupin, and it makes me very sad. He's so fucking great, or was, but we love him.
Well, I mean, there's a hell of a lot of Lupin the Third Part 2 we've yet to watch, so there's a lot of Yasuo Yamada Lupin out there.
Yes, and we're not watching all of Part 3 either, because it's also a long show. Anyway, let's talk about, while we were hinting at Zenigata earlier, and we talked about Jigen, I want to talk about the use of the different members of Lupin's gang. So we mentioned Jigen, and I don't know if there's anything more to add other than, again, he gets that giant anti-tank rifle, and it's great. And Jigen is also just, like Zenigata, there's basically no way to do Jigen wrong. And I've seen some people say, like, Jigen in this movie is weirdly happy-go-lucky. I don't think that's true. I think, like, he smiles, but Jigen smiles in all versions of Lupin. He does back in the early episodes of Part 1. He is often very amused by what is going on, and I think I like the version of him in this movie a lot, and Kiyoshi Kobayashi is always just the best.
Yeah, I think he feels generally in character. I mean, he's so kind of secondary to the main plot line that, like, I think he feels sort of, like, happy and he's not taking it super seriously, but I think that's partially because this is not what, like, one of his Part 2 episodes where it's like a Cold War thriller that he's in the center of. Like, he's on the sidelines having fun as Lupin's buddy. And there are some sequences of that first 30 minutes that we didn't quite touch on that I just want to point out are my 2 favorite Jigen moments. Probably my favorite is the one where they're at the ruined castle and Jigen, like, and Lupin is sort of a little bit morose, and he's sat on this, like, banister or whatever, and Jigen comes over, and there's this long sequence where Jigen's just sort of standing there, and he leans on the staircase, which is a great Jigen posture that he has, and then he sits down next to Lupin, like, uncomfortably close, and then, like, in all of their interaction there, he's just trying to needle Lupin enough to just say, it's like, come on, out with it, dude. Tell me what the fuck is bothering you. That is a great interaction. And then you've got, this might be actually my favorite piece of animation, is them eating fucking spaghetti.
Yes,
so good. Them eating spaghetti and then, like, battling over this giant ball of spaghetti is the fucking best shit. And another one of those where you're like, oh, right, this is supposed to be Italy, because I was looking at a lot of what looked like Sweden earlier, but now we're definitely in Italy because of all the giant spaghetti.
Indeed. It's like Lady and the Tramp if they were fighting over the spaghetti.
Yes.
And it's so good. They do a version of that at the beginning of episode 145 that's, like, even more elaborate and is amazing. But no, I love that. You're forgetting the other half of the scene in the ruins where he gets Lupin in a headlock and is, like, getting around, like, trying to get him to confess. And Yamada is very funny in that scene. Kobayashi is very funny in that scene. But, like, all of this, like, it's some of the best Jigen character animation, even if he is more of a background character. There's also that scene where the weird, like, Cagliostro ninjas come after them at night. And Jigen and Lupin have this big fight that is really extraordinary. It's a very short sequence, but it's also just incredible.
Yeah, I will say I do think the Cagliostro assassins are a little goofy. There's something a little bit like I think that, and then the design of when the Count gets his whole like get up on with his black cloak and the goat skull that feels like, yeah, this design needed a couple more passes. Like it feels a little, I don't know, like it feels a little like original Dragon Ball movie villain, you know, not Dragon Ball Z movies, the original, those one of those three. Like it feels like here that pop up in those is like, this is kind of like Dragon Ball movie version of General Red or something. I don't know.
It's like Dragon Ball movie 2, the Dracula movie, where the sleeping princess in Devil's Castle. I can buy that. Yeah,
it's just
I love it.
It's just a little bit off. It's not to the standards of some of the other designs you get, and it's certainly like not like. It's one of the only things that feels like, yeah, this is earlier in Miyazaki's career, because like in later Miyazaki movies, every random small character element always feels so refined and well thought out and like kind of iconic looking in its own right. And all of the weird assassin dudes with the punch gloves just feel like they're from a much cheaper production. I don't know. They just look off to me. Not in terms of like the way they animate looks good. It's the design of the character itself that looks weird to me.
Yeah. I mean, I think it is specifically, they feel like I don't know if we would feel this in 1979, but looking at them now, they do feel like a prototype of characters you see in Nausicaa and in Laputa specifically. Like he has figures who kind of cut a similar, shape, and I think they are more refined there. But yeah, for a person's first movie to have, you can pick out like the one design that feels a little undercooked. That's pretty good. A minus.
Yes, yeah, it's not a big criticism. It's just one of those few things that feels like weirdly dated about the movie is those specific character designs.
Yeah, they're not in it much either, which I think also they're very vestigial. But anyway, all right, Jigen's always great. I don't think you can mess up Jigen. It would be very hard, especially when you have Kiyoshi Kobayashi there.
Yeah.
He's great. Zenigata, I really like Zenigata's role in this movie. It is also smaller, but it is still very fun. Like, I think Miyazaki's Zenigata is a little more upstanding and like committed to his role with the law than sometimes you get in part 2, where he really just wants to be Lupin's buddy. But I buy all versions of Zenigata there.
I like Zenigata in this movie quite a bit. Like, I think one of the things that helps it feel like a Lupin movie is the like Lupin and Zenigata teaming up halfway through. Even though obviously we've seen multiple episodes of Lupin the Third Part 2 that do Lupin and Zenigata teaming up, it still is a fundamental idea that feels movie-esque, where you take your sort of classic protagonist, antagonist from your TV show that are your sort of eternal rivals, and then in the movie they have to team up. So I think like Zenigata's role it's not as sort of front and center as other Zenigata stories, but it's a good role for him here. And he does get, I think, maybe the biggest laugh out of me in the movie, which is at the end when he is like hamming it up with Fujiko filming as they're going through the counterfeit stuff. It's like Goro Naya is selling it, as he always does. And so I think all of Zenigata's stuff in this movie plays well for me.
Yeah, that's what I was going to mention, is the whole scheme with Fujiko doing the filming and him hamming it up for the cameras and fooling absolutely nobody, because everyone at ICPO is like, oh my god, this guy's embarrassing us. But like, he did just bust a major counterfeit ring. I feel like Zenigata just bought himself another 10 years of chasing Lupin fruitlessly, right? Because it's like,
he's exposed a conspiracy that has shaped the history of the world that goes back over 2,000 years. I mean, like, what he's done is like he's changed our whole perspective on the history of like Europe forever. I mean, it's pretty insane the depths to which he has revealed, the kind of the rot at the root of society.
It is incredible. He's a damn good detective, and I do Goro Naya. I feel like every time anybody gave Goro Naya material, they knew what they had in that guy, because he just can sell. He can make anything funny. And he's so good. And when you give him actually funny material, it's really funny. But I love him here. I love all the scenes in the sewers when they are having to work together. And I love their little... Like, for half of this movie, Lupin is fucking naked. No, that's more episode 155. But there's a little bit of it here where you have... him and Zenigata have to take their clothes off to fool the like assassin guys as they're down there, and that's really funny. But yeah, and I love the whole thing where he's on the auto gyro and Lupin leaves him to steer it, and he does not know how. And there's some very good stuff around there trying to save Lupin when he gets fucking shot in the chest halfway through this movie, which is a pretty heavy scene. Yeah. But yeah, they're getting ahead of ourselves. Goemon is definitely the one who is used least in this movie, but I actually like Goemon's moments in this quite a bit. I like him like coming to Cagliostro on the back of this fucking like cart that is being pulled by a truck. And he's like extremely Japanese, even more so than usual in this one. And he's very taciturn. But his big action moment is when Lupin is like on fire coming by them and he's like in the autogyro. You think what he's going to do is do what he did in Mystery of Mama, where he cuts the like helicopter apart. But what he does instead is he cuts all of Lupin's clothes off, and then Lupin lands naked, but now not on fire. And he repeats the line he had in Mamo that is an old samurai line of like, I have cut another trifling thing. That made me laugh so hard because it's such a good little inversion of the Goemon moment, where instead of doing something like cutting apart a big machine, he just cut Lupin's clothes off, and then he says the line, and I cheered at that. It's very funny.
Yeah, it is a good moment, but it is like kind of the only thing Goemon does in the movie. He's the character you most feel like, yeah, you could have, like, it would be pretty trivial to cut him out of this film if you had to.
Right. But he and Jigen also do the thing where they are holding up the like fake Lupin puppet during the wedding scene, which is a fun moment. But again, it doesn't necessarily need to be Goemon. And then there's Fujiko. And actually, I think Fujiko is used more and better in this movie than I remembered. And I do think her usage here, and particularly in episode 145, have been very influential on future uses of Fujiko that I have seen, where we don't have like the kind of seductress element of her here. What we do have is the fucking badass who packs more heat than anyone else on the planet. And like there is a scene here where she's rescuing Clarice where Fujiko must kill like 30 dudes. She has grenades, she has giant guns, she's going to town on it. The whole idea of her infiltrating as a governess, and then we learn over the course of it her actual like goal of what she is there to steal, and then she eventually breaks out and starts killing people. That's like every other episode of The Woman Called Fujiko Mine is like the like governess drawing of her in here they pay homage to several times. All of that, it is a background element of the movie. Although I do think episode 145 in particular really expands on it. But this version of Fujiko, again, not having the kind of sexual femme fatale thing going on, but other aspects of the character, I think, read really well here.
Like, I like her use in 145, but she didn't really register much to me in this movie. I don't know, like, I think part of it is I really do not like her design in this film. It just looks really bad. Like, I don't like the choice they've gone with her hair color, where she's just sort of like strawberry blonde, which just feels weird. It's not the kind of orangish color you got in part 1. It's not the brunette you got in part 2. And there's something about the kind of blonde they've gone for that just doesn't feel very Fujiko. And then her being in the army fatigues, the coloring on them just looks off. They're like too saturated, like the green is too bright. Like, I don't mind the idea of her going like commando, I think is cool. But the look of the character to me just is like visually off, in a way that feels weird next to the other characters in the movie. And then her role in the movie is fairly slight, right? She feels like she's going to be a more important part of it than she actually is, because her whole role in the movie is, broadly speaking, the same thing she did in the boat episode in part 1, right, where they're stealing the Cat's Eye gem and all that, where she has already infiltrated the place that Lupin is trying to get into. She's disguised as somebody else. They meet up partway through, and they're both kind of nominally going after the same objective. But yeah, I don't think Fujiko's use in this movie really did much for me.
145 is obviously her standout, and probably her like standout episode of all of part 2, arguably. But yeah, I don't disagree. And the character design thing, I don't know. There's Fujiko looks different in almost every appearance. She, like, especially in this early stuff, like, nobody had a particularly strong vision for what Fujiko should look like in the early years of Lupin III, I don't think. And I think even Monkey Punch would tell you that, because she was originally like 10 different characters who just eventually coalesced into Fujiko in the manga. But yeah, I do think and I think the comparison to the boat episode in part 1, which is a standout, obviously, is kind of the same setup here. And I'll flag for if we ever do another Lupin season and we talk about the Woman Called Fujiko Mine, I think there's a combination of some elements you see of the character here and in that earlier Part 1 episode, and then some other femme fatale aspects of the character that I think Mari Okada and Miyuki Sawashiro have a very fun time putting together. Yeah. And then that's the main 5 characters. Yes. And then, of course, we also have the Count, the evil. It's a very good villain design because that dude has the most punchable anime face, and it is very satisfying when he dies the most grisly death in all of Lupin, I think, where he gets fucking clicked together by the giant hands of the clock. But yeah, even if, as you say, his like wedding outfit is pretty extra.
Yes. I love the idea, we're getting a bit ahead of ourselves with the wedding, but I love the idea that they get basically the fucking Pope or whoever to come in to preside over this wedding where it's like clearly an evil cult is doing this. Like all these dudes in giant like black robes with holding up these fucking swords, and they're in a dungeon lit by torches. And it's like, this is the most evil looking shit I have ever seen in my entire life. And they like ship the Pope in or whoever to go preside over the wedding. And thought that was very funny.
Yeah, they specifically say it's an archbishop from the Vatican, which is great. Yeah. Well, let's talk about, we're kind of jumping around here, but while we're talking about the wedding scene, I guess the big scene we would be skipping over is... Well, let's talk about this. This whole scene where you have the auto gyro where Lupin and Zenigata escape the castle together and they get in the Count's auto gyro. And again, just a really amazing sense of motion and physics to all of this stuff. There's this great line where they're flying away and Lupin says to Zenigata he has to go pick someone up, and Zenigata yells, "No kidnapping!" And I love that little scolding he does. And of course, Lupin's intentions are much purer this time. And this is also the scene where, like I said, Fujiko is just gunning down a crazy amount of guards. Fujiko has quite the body count in this movie. And then Lupin leaves Zenigata to pirate the autogyro. And there is this amazing shot when, while Lupin, the gyro goes down and Lupin is like shot in the chest by the big, machine gun that they're firing, and the animation kind of goes slow-mo at that point. You see Clarice's, the emphasis on her as she's seeing it happening, and then Lupin's body sliding down. There's some really fantastic animation in that scene.
Yeah, and how he's shot through the back and it comes out the front, and you see his tie go shooting out because the bullet comes out through where the tie is. The way all that is animated, because it's not gruesome or anything. You see blood after he's fallen and it starts to pool out a little bit from under him, but it's a pretty kind of goreless scene. But the impact of the way they animate it, where he seems sort of fine, and then within basically 2 frames, you see you get the sense of the impact of that thing is just shot through his body, and everything around him has physically reacted to that energy being pushed through him. It's very well animated.
Yeah, it's incredible. They also the movie kind of snaps into a serious focus for a moment here, where Lupin is trying to urge Clarice to go, don't give this up for him. Let me, go here. You're fine, Clarice. And Yasuo Yamada is really great in that moment. And then you have Fujiko trying to save Lupin by urging Clarice hey, he hides stuff in his collar, and she's able to get that out. I think that's just a very good tense moment of kind of the classic adventure movie moment. This is also a very Indiana Jones thing of, we've rescued the girl, but now she's going to be taken back by the villain. But it's a very good version of that scene. And where Zenigata comes in to save Lupin, and he flies down while Fujiko runs over, fluidly grabs the body or Lupin's body and jumps up onto the gyro. Really, again, amazing character animation in action. I also love Clarice being a total badass and grabbing onto the barrel of the fucking machine gun to try to save them, which I think would probably burn her hands very badly.
Oh, yes. Yeah, definitely. That you would not want to hold on to, grab the barrel of the machine gun like that. That was just firing. You will get fucked up.
Oh, and this is the part where Goemon comes in to catch Lupin, where he cuts the clothes off, like I said. Fujiko flies away like a superhero. She has fucking wings on her back, which is a great little moment.
This is so ridiculous. She just jumps off, and there's I think it holds on her just a little bit too long before her glider comes out, that it does literally look like she is flying like Superman for a little bit, and then the glider pops out. You're oh, okay. But yeah, it is very silly.
Love that. We already talked about the whole thing of Zenigata at Interpol, which I love, of, this Japanese cop trying to convince them to go after this big international counterfeiting scheme. There's a very good horn version of the Zenigata March there that I think is in the TV show as well, but I love that scene. And then there's the whole part where Lupin is in bed with what I call the adorable World Masterpiece Theater dog who won't leave his bedside. Because it is totally that dog who is named Carl, and then the old man who was the gardener are just taken out of Heidi Girl of the Alps.
Yes.
I think literally. I think those are in that, like, the dog looks like the dog of Flanders. That is also, I don't think that's a Takahata show, but that is another Masterpiece Theater. It's hilarious.
Yes, and Capcom recently did that parody commercial for Resident Evil 4 Remake.
Yes.
That is like a Masterpiece World Theater parody, and the old man in those, who is like also kind of supposed to be the guy you fight, who's like the first enemy you fight in Resident Evil 4, just looks like the dude in this, because as you say, it's like kind of stock old man Masterpiece Theater design, and it's very funny. I kept on expecting him to like speak like nonsense Spanish.
Yes.
Yeah.
We should do a whole Japanimation station on those ads, because that was the best commercial for a video game fucking ever. Anyway, I also love that Lupin has this brief shonen anime moment where he demands all this food to restore his lost blood, which is like, Luffy has done that, Goku has done that. I haven't seen Naruto. I'm betting Naruto has done that.
I mean, if it's Naruto, it's just ramen. It's not a lot of other foods. It's just a lot of ramen.
But I also think the joke of that scene, the punchline that Lupin just gets sick and throws up, is a great punchline to like what would actually happen if the shonen hero tried to eat his weight in meat to restore his body. That would not work like that.
Yes. I mean, Lupin absolutely should have gotten killed. Like, there's no way he would have survived that. He got shot through the chest with a fucking machine gun bullet at extremely close range. He certainly wouldn't be like ready to go crash the wedding a couple days later, but he's the hero. He's got to get up.
Yep. No, it's very good. Love all of that. And I love how they work in the bandages in the big like final section of the movie. There's some really cool stuff with that, because obviously he uses the like dummy doll that he puts up. He puts the extra bandages on, but even I think for parts of the finale of the movie, he still has them around his head. I think it's there on the poster in Japanese. I would have to check. But one of them has that. He has like the bandana around his head on the poster. Yes, he does in the Japanese poster here. Anyway, it's good stuff. And then this is where we get the entire sort of montage of how he has been to Cagliostro before. And this is where the movie sort of contextualizes itself as the older Lupin. We see the like flashbacks to part one and all of that stuff. Really lovely scene. This is another just absolute Yasuo Yamada standout, where I think the way his voice trembles a little bit as he remembers these scenes is really lovely.
Yeah, I wish in the flashback they had incorporated, he's just like, and then there was that one time that I spent an entire year in prison just to spite Zenigata. It's like, man, there was something wrong with me back then.
They should have done that when he and Zenigata were in the sewers, and they're just sitting there, and Zenigata's like, remember the time you spent a whole year in prison to fuck with me, Lupin? I'm never forgiving you for that.
Yeah, like that's actually the reason why Zenigata is so obsessed with it now, is like, it's just, that's such a fucked up thing to do. He can't countenance it. It's like, it's why he has to capture Lupin.
Yep. A moment I had not, I don't think, noticed before, but when the Archbishop arrives and you know that it is Jigen because you can hear Kiyoshi Kobayashi, but Jigen comes up disguised as the gardener to like kidnap the Archbishop, basically. But that whole scene, there's this long tracking shot along all the traffic that is backed up for the wedding. That is 100% an homage to Jean-Luc Godard's Weekend, which has this very famous like 10-minute tracking shot of like endless traffic that is this whole big set piece in the movie. It's one of the most famous Godard moments. Miyazaki and these people absolutely knew these French New Wave movies. It's too close to what Weekend does, like, to not be an homage. And I just think it's funny that there's this piece of Lupin Miyazaki media that has this random Jean-Luc Godard shot in the middle of it.
Yes, and then you've got Jigen as like a weird French, Italian farmer man, wherever the fuck they are. And I love he's like, can you bless my goat to the Archbishop?
Yes.
And the Archbishop like does the whole cross thing. I thought that was very funny.
And then you have the wedding, and I love the wedding sequence. It is very extra, but the just incredibly thick atmosphere of this satanic cult wedding. Every possible red flag. I know the Catholic Church has been up to some shitty stuff. I really do think a Catholic bishop should know better than to accept. Although, to be fair, that bishop never did reach the site because it is Lupin in disguise. Maybe the actual bishop would have pulled up to the castle and seen all the guys in the black robes with pointed hoods and gone, yeah, you know what? This is our line. The Catholic Church has found its line. We are not helping you with this. Do your cult ritual elsewhere.
Yeah, I mean, because it does, we're just talking about those Resident Evil 4 ads, but they basically just look like the cultists from Resident Evil 4. Like, it looks like
Yes.
Leon should fucking, like, suplex one of those motherfuckers and their heads pop off and a giant parasite shoots out. They are very, very blatantly evil.
And I love when you get into the terrifying cathedral and you have all the signifiers of Christianity, the crosses and the stained glass window and the altar all become ominous and terrifying. This is the kind of stuff I love when you get in anime or other pieces of Japanese culture that like use Christianity for some of its like admittedly weird symbols when you pull them out of context that can look very scary. It's cool. And then I think Lupin's whole trick here, where he is like throwing his voice or using a recording or whatever, and speaking over everyone. You have the ghostly Lupin being raised on the platform by Jigen and Goemon, saying, "This holy ceremony is polluted with base desire. We speak for the dead in the dungeon below." And did you notice, Sean, that Jigen is wearing vampire teeth through this whole sequence?
Yes. Yeah, no, yeah, because they're all three supposed to be like, yeah, classic monsters, basically.
It's cool. This is one of my favorite tricks Lupin has ever played. He is fucking with this entire assembly of cultists, and I love it.
Yeah, it's a great scene, and I do,
Yeah.
I have some trauma associated with vampires and Lupin, and it's like I had some flashbacks to my research journey on figuring out the fuck was going on with that episode. But as soon as I got over that, I was like, yes, this is a good scene.
Yeah, in fact, you know what? Put a pin in this for a second. I have to say, since we last recorded, Sean, it's been a couple of weeks, not for listeners, but since we were recording episodes, I went on a whole trip and everything, and I have told a lot of people about Japanese Jesus. This is a new fact that I cannot stop sharing with people, that there is a small town in Japan that believes it has the resting place of Jesus Christ, who moved to Japan and lived to the age of 104 with his Japanese wife and children. It is too amazing a fact not to share, and then, of course, to connect it to, and there's an anime that connects it to vampires and a thief.
Yeah, it definitely is one of those weird sort of facts that you have in your back pocket at a party where it's like, oh, they're having like a conversation. How can I work in this to sort of like, help ingratiate myself and schmooze a little bit? It's definitely one of those weird fun facts you can learn about the world. Is Jesus and his brother and all that crazy shit.
Yes. But no, this sequence in the church is incredible. You have Lupin being stabbed, the dummy Lupin being stabbed by all the swords, and then Lupin revealing that he is the bishop, of course. He opens up the big robe, and he's just got firecrackers everywhere, and then the firecrackers are going off, and everything is exploding. Zenigata is fighting his way down into the crypts to look at the counterfeit bills. It is a really great sequence of action and atmosphere. It's just such a virtuosic climax. You also have Fujiko on the camera where she is announcing everything while battling away soldiers without fucking looking back behind her. She'll like pull out a grenade and toss it. There's just so much motion and action going on here. It's one of my favorite scenes in the movie.
Yeah, it's really very spectacular, and then it leads into what we were talking about with Zenigata running down into the basement where the counterfeiting machines are, and him doing this like, oh, what is this? This looks like a massive counterfeiting operation. What have we stumbled upon here? And his whole crazy bit is very fun.
Yeah, love all of that. And then we get the clock tower climax, and this is genuinely a hard scene to talk about because I have not seen many more scenes in movies that have been as strip mined by pop culture as this one. Mm-hmm. Like, every little inch of this scene, I feel like, has been borrowed from and expanded upon. And, The Great Mouse Detective is the one that I think is most obvious and kind of one-to-one. But Disney had quite a few, like, weird tower climaxes in the Disney Renaissance era, kind of like that. The Hunchback of Notre Dame is another one. And And I think just in general, the motion of these cogs and the way the characters are running across them, Lupin having the big wrench he gets out, and there's the sword fight with the wrench, then there's the finale of them out on the hands of the clock. It's so good that it absolutely survives its pop culture strip mining to still be incredible. But you do, while you're watching it, your brain is just like the synapses are firing to all the other places you've seen this called upon.
Yeah, and it does. I do want to do research to see like if this is one of the reasons why like every Famicom platformer has clock tower levels, or if that's would have been happened independently. Obviously, there have been other scenes in the history of movies predating Castle of Cagliostro that would have taken place inside of clock towers. You've got one in that Orson Welles movie with the Nazis that is like that. So it's like it pops up in places, but there is like a specificity to some of the stuff here that you see in a lot of fiction, either Japanese fiction after this, or as you're saying, some like the Disney stuff that is very, very directly reminiscent. But like, I think here, one of the big things is it's, because it's a Miyazaki movie, it's the attention to detail with like the movement of characters having to manage being on these rotating cogs and all that stuff and moving around them. In particular, there's a part where the count is like on one that's horizontal, and it's like he's having to kind of jog in place backwards to be able to stay where he is. And you just look at it as like, Jesus Christ, that is so good. The way that the character is animated to be moving but not be moving, right? Like they're moving in place to be able to stay where they are in space because everything else is moving around them. There's just something about the interconnected relationship of all the movement that happens in the image and how that movement has to affect the characters that are standing on those platforms. It's so detailed and like physically believable and just like incredibly well observed. It makes you wonder, like, did they just build a giant cog in the movie studio set? And they're like, we just gotta like throw an intern on there and just spin it up real fast. We'll use it as reference. I don't care if he gets crushed up in the gears. It'll be worth it.
You do have that moment where Lupin tells Clarice to look away because one of the guards gets crushed into the gears. Yes. You don't see it, but it's kind of like there's some other moments in this movie that we talked about Lupin getting shot or what eventually will happen to the Count. They're very grisly, and I think they're even grislier for the ways you don't see the detail. They just kind of like linger with you, because most Miyazaki movies do not have anything that violent in them. Obviously, this is the guy who is most famous for My Neighbor Totoro. My Neighbor Totoro does not have anybody getting crushed to death by the hands of a giant clock.
No, but it does have people riding inside of a giant cat bus, and it's incredibly disgusting.
That has to be one of the longest running jokes on this podcast, Sean. That's like back to like episode 3 of this, not this Japanimation Station. I mean like the weekly stuff. Anyway.
It's not a fucking joke, man. It's not an ongoing joke. It's a real trauma that I'm living through.
Sean has always been disturbed by the cat bus. Anyway, we can talk about that later on season 4 of Japanimation Station, talking about the cat bus. Just 10 episodes all about the cat bus. We're going to go to Japan. We're going to go to the Ghibli Museum. We're going to record from inside the real cat bus. It's going to be great. Anyway. Jesus, okay, that got dark. Yes, the whole final scene also, I think, when they are on the hands of the outer clock, the sense of spatial relations to me is amazing. The scale of it. This is also something you're going to see in episodes 145 and 155 of the anime, where like I am not someone I don't think who is really afraid of heights. But there's something about this scene, all the plane stuff in episode 145, some of the robot stuff in 155, where the sense of scale is so good. And I think this is one of those where you feel the, like, they are up this high, that I get a little, like, vertigo feeling watching it. Like, it really is embodied. And, of course, the big finale being Lupin being, like Clarice dropping and Lupin running down the side of the building after her to jump and catch her as they go into the water. It's breathless. Like, you realize, like, when they finally land and everything's okay, you, like, take a breath again and you're like, wow, this is incredible.
Yeah, and as you say, I think it is like that sense of scale and how well realized it is that really makes that scene work so well. And then it does lead to what is a truly brutal death scene for that dude getting squashed between the two clock hands, like you squish like a grape between your fingers, and it's zoomed out far enough that you don't see the details of it, but like the sound effect that happens and the fact that like there's just something very visceral about you seeing it from a distance that you don't see the detail, but you understand physically what must happen for these two clock hands to intersect. It's gruesome.
There's that little click they do as the bones crunch apart, and there's that like little bit of resistance on the clock hands as they make the final closing of just like, oh yeah, there's something in there. Click. It's incredible. Very good. And then the finale where they are walking through the city ruins, the Roman ruins uncovered by the flood, by the water receding. I guess it's an anti-flood, however you would call that, but the water pouring out. And I think that is just another incredibly beautiful set. There's this line that I love where Lupin says, "It's a treasure for the world, too big to go in my pocket." I really like that. That's a good like marriage, I think, of the chivalric Lupin and the thief Lupin. And then Interpol finally is moving in at last, and you have all the parachutes coming down over the castle. It's a really incredible set of images.
Yeah, I do particularly like that line of him saying it's a treasure for the world, too big to fit in my pocket. Is, as you say, it's a good way of like, it feels like a thing that Lupin would say in Lupin the Third Part 1 or Part 2. Like it feels really honest to that character because that's not the kind of thing he steals, really, right? He steals things for the challenge of it. And so him, seeing the nature of the treasure, the secret that's been hidden by the Cagliostros, that it's just a good response that feels really true to who he is.
Yeah. And then I really love this moment where Clarice says, she'll come with him, she'll become a thief. And it's one of my favorite moments in Lupin, but also in Miyazaki's filmography, where he processes the moment and the camera is behind Clarice looking at Lupin as he's like kind of struggling to figure out whether he wants to like take her with him or leave her. And there's this sheer amount of performance put into the character animation. This is like one of Yasuo Otsuka's, I think, defining moments too as an animator. And then he puts on this brave face and tells her, "You don't want to go back into the dark. You just got out into the sun. Don't become grimy like me." And she purses her lips to kiss him, and he comes in and kisses her forehead. And yes, this is the most romantic, heroic version of Lupin you're ever going to see. This is not as in keeping with any other version of the character, but I just think in the context of this movie, it's beautiful. And Yasuo Yamada is so good. There's the moment where he embraces her after she says she'll become a thief, and he just says, "Clarice." And the way Yamada says that, and like the heartbreak he puts into it, it's a really beautiful moment. I really love it.
It is a very beautiful moment. I couldn't help but, in my head, when I watched it, compare it to the similar scene that's at the end of Mystery of Mamo that ends with a kiss, where then Lupin pulls down Fujiko's dress and presses her nipple. It's like, these are the contrasts. These are the two sides of the Lupin the Third franchise. One is this very beautiful, like, noble kiss where he realizes, I'm a much older man, like what she feels for me isn't really romance, all this stuff, and she's been swept up in all this, she has to go back to the world she's come from, and so I'll give you her this like little peck on the forehead. And then the other is him pressing the Fujiko's nipple, and that intercut with atomic bombs going off, basically. So it's a franchise that has something for everybody, is what I'm saying.
Very true. This moment is also on the back of the soundtrack, because, of course, it's one of the most iconic images of the movie. So I have my CD here. The front is Lupin with the little magic trick he does with Clarice, and the back is this scene that we're talking about here. But yeah, I think it's an all-timer. I like Zenigata's follow-up where Lupin has left, and then Zenigata is talking to Clarice and says, "Oh, he did steal something very valuable, and it's your heart." And then he does this little wink and runs off and yells, "Follow Lupin to the ends of the earth," and all of them are back in their proper place. But there is this one little moment, great Kiyoshi Kobayashi moment, where as they're driving away, Lupin looks a little sullen, and Jigen says very gently, "You could stay if you want." But then what really kicks Lupin back into a good mood is Fujiko coming by on her bike and Zenigata giving chase. And they're able to kind of go back into their regular rhythms.
Yeah, I'll say that I don't know if that side of the ending fully worked for me. I think the Zenigata line about like, "Omae no kokoro da," he stole your heart, I think it's a little bit too much. I think it's a little much. And because it also just like, it feels like such a direct recognition by Zenigata that Lupin has, not only has he not done anything wrong here, he's done something so incredibly heroic and noble that I just don't understand why Zenigata's chasing him. Like, I just don't, it doesn't really make sense. I don't really buy that, like, okay, now we can get back to, like, the Fujiko Lupin relationship. I don't know, it's like he's so, like, noble in the final, like, moments of this movie that it does feel like you can't put spilled milk back in the bottle, right? If this is like the older Lupin who has kind of grown beyond that life and he's kind of realized that and is moving on and he's like trying to work for something better, like, I just don't think you can go back to, well, now, you know, I'm going to go on wacky chases with Fujiko, and Zenigata's going to chase me around the world. Like, it just, I think this movie is asking you to buy into, I think, a more like fundamental shift of the status quo of the world of Lupin III that obviously wouldn't maintain for a future story or anything. It's a standalone movie, but it doesn't feel like this movie then segues back into, and then you get into more Lupin adventures the way that, like, A Mystery of Mamo, you believe that, yeah, of course, they're going back to doing their Lupin stuff because they never really stopped it. I think it's like one of the only things in this movie that feels a little off to me is that it ends with that note of them going back to the status quo.
That's fair, and it works for me. I kind of love how the status quo is used as sort of both joyous and tragic here. But I do understand what you're saying. But, you know, maybe Zenigata, it's what we said earlier. He just can't let go of that year Lupin spent torturing him in prison. And it's like, Lupin, I don't care how many damsels in distress you save. We have a score to settle, motherfucker. And he does not say that. But, you know, maybe that's the headcanon we can give it.
No, he does. I mean, he does give a wink with those pretty Zenigata eyelashes he has in this version of his character design. You know,
pretty Zenigata. You know, he's a sex symbol. Really, yep. I think that's the thing about Koichi Zenigata. He's a sex symbol. All right. What else is there to say about... Okay, there's lots we could still say. This is a big movie. But what else do we want to say about the Castle of Cagliostro before we break and go into the episodes?
I think we hit all the major stuff that I had for it. Yeah, again, it's like, it's a great movie that has like an interesting relationship to the source material, right? And as you say, there's that tension that both feels productive and also, as someone who's a fan of that other stuff, like sometimes feels like it goes a little bit too far to me. But that's obviously going to be, what is your perspective on these characters? What are the stuff about Lupin that sort of appeals to you? And does this movie hit all those notes? That's going to be up to you as an individual, I guess, and your relationship to the franchise.
And I think I just also want to say, in the Hayao Miyazaki canon, you know, this is his first theatrical movie. No director has ever come as fully formed into feature filmmaking as Hayao Miyazaki. It's just incredible. Like, this is not a, like, I think, you know, some people might expect, oh, this is like a weird pre-Ghibli work. Is it going to be kind of weird and vestigial? No, it's like one of his best animated movies. I think it's one of his best plotted movies. Like, everything about it, to me, it is like top shelf. I put this with the best of his work, like Spirited Away and Mononoke and Laputa. Just, it is in that upper tier to me. And I think it is really incredible. And of course, the problem with viewing this is like, oh, it's his debut. It wasn't really. He'd been working in the industry for a really long time. And he and Yasuo Otsuka and everyone working on this were fucking veterans by the time they were working on movies, you know? And that's part of like the experience that goes into this, but it's such a cool film.
Yeah, I'm really glad I finally was able to fucking watch it. Like yeah. I said, it's a movie I've been waiting to watch for a very long time, and it lives up to the hype. Like, it's really good.
Japanimation Station.
Thanks for listening to Japanimation Station. If you're enjoying the show, please remember to like and subscribe, leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and tell your friends.
You can also find us over at the Purely Academic Podcast, our potentially educational variety show where we talk video games, movies, TV, and more every month. And you can read my movie reviews and follow everything we release together on the Fade to Lack Substack at www.jonathanlack.com.
And now, back to the show.
Speaking of living up to the hype, The 2 episodes that Miyazaki directed for part 2 that we're going to talk about now. This is episode 145, Albatross, The Wings of Death, which aired July 1980, and episode 155, Farewell, O Dearest Lupin, which aired October 6th, 1980. I had not seen these before. These were some of the last pieces of like Miyazaki-directed media I hadn't seen, and I'd just kind of always been saving them for a rainy day. I'd always been very excited. They are the most widely seen episodes of Lupin, and I had heard many things about their animation, and I have to say they did not disappoint. I think on a technical level, if anything, episode 145 is just as, if not more impressive to me as Cagliostro, and 155 has a ton to recommend it too, as well as being this very interesting, weird proto-version of stuff from both Nausicaa and Laputa. So Miyazaki directed, wrote, and storyboarded these under the pseudonym Tsutomi Teruki, which is it's a pun on telecom itself, Terukamu, basically. But it was revealed by October of 1980 by Animage that this was Miyazaki. So while it was pseudonymous, people found out the truth very quickly. In 2021, for the 50th anniversary of the first Lupin anime, TMS and Nippon TV did a poll of fans voting on their favorite episodes of all time. 155, Farewell Lupin, was voted number 1, with episode 145, Albatross, at number 4. And just to fill these out, because I think you'll find this amusing, Sean, Is Lupin Burning, the very first episode, was number 2. And part 1, episode 4, the prison episode we never shut up about, was number 5, with the finale of part 5 that had like just aired when this poll happened at number 3. So I guess part 5 has a really good finale. We're not there yet, obviously. But all those other ones we've seen. And I understand why these are as famous as they are, because they are, I can't believe these were made for TV. They're unreal.
Yeah, like, I think 155 is a weird beast. Like, I'm honestly like, it's got incredibly good animation. I'm surprised that it's rated as highly as it is, because I think, like, the story of it is good, but I don't think it's the best Lupin the Third Part 2 episode. I don't think it's particularly close. It's got phenomenal animation.
I think 145 is definitely the better one, though.
Yes, of those two, 145, because 145 it's designed to be a big action spectacle episode. Like, that's what the story is. It is not, it's not it's not your Cold War spy thriller with Jigen that's like this cold burn character story. It is meant to be crazy action, massive hijinks, big battle in the sky. And it pulls that off with absolute fucking aplomb, because yes, it has some of the best animation you will ever see in any TV episode of anything ever. It's one of its main pieces of competition is episode 99 of Lupin the Third Part 2. It is pretty mind blowing that aired on TV, because it is crazy. Obviously, like, compared to Cagliostro, it doesn't have the level of like minute detail in every single scene throughout the entire episode. But the like big scenes, those look as good as the stuff in Cagliostro. Like the big flying action sequences where like the most kind of effort was put into, like those scenes are absolutely at movie level quality, and it's incredible.
Yeah. So let's just taking these one at a time. That first one, Albatross, Wings of Death, I would absolutely put this as I would have to think about it. I would put this up there with episode 99 or episode 58 as the best episode of part 2 that we've seen. Mm-hmm. What I love about this one is it is truly nonstop. It is like literally, like before you even get to the credits, like when the title comes up in the very distinctive Lupin way, you have the entire scene where they are in the little RV eating their food, and they're doing this big fight with the food, and then Fujiko comes in and they're being blown apart, and then there's a car chase, and all this manic stuff before you even get to the like actual plot of the episode, and then it just keeps moving. And the second half of the episode is all the stuff on the plane up in midair, and there are so many dynamics to it. There's what Fujiko is doing on the plane, there's what Lupin and Zenigata are doing flying around, and Jigen is there as well doing some crazy stuff. But like it is just like, I don't think I've ever seen an episode of TV with this much motion in it. Like, it is always moving, and it really does at a certain point feel like an out-of-body experience to me, where just the amount of fluidity, so much of it is up in the air. You get this, like, vertigo from it. It's a really crazy experience. I don't think I can immediately name a better animated episode of TV that I've seen. This is just fully a little 20-minute movie.
Yeah, it's pretty insane. As you say, it's just like that sense of momentum of it just like goes and goes and goes and goes and goes, and you just like keep on expecting it to have to stop and slow down to take a breather, and it doesn't. And it's like, it's not that the episode's exhausting, it's very well paced, but as you say, it's like something is always happening. Some, like, the ante is always being upped as you're moving through. It also has just like a totally bonkers plot about a man who looks suspiciously like Dr. Robotnik from Sonic the Hedgehog, of like, especially when he gets like soot covered up, so like his character like colors don't come through as much, so you can just read him purely as being Dr. Robotnik. I find that interesting. Again, I have no idea if that's an actual influence or if that's just a coincidence of character design, but he looks a fucking lot like Dr. Robotnik. But that dude has a giant flying fortress called the Albatross that has like tiny nuclear bomb factories in its wings, and he's making little tiny nuclear bombs to sell to the world. And he's got little activation keys to turn on the nukes, and Fujiko stole one of those and escaped, and that's how the plot happens, which I was a little bit confused by. Why does he care so much about the one activation key when he's got like 90 other nukes and he's got the activation keys for those ones? That's a weird piece of plotting. But the whole idea of the episode is so fucking insane. You can't help but love it.
Yeah, well, and I think of the three things we're talking about today, Castle of Cagliostro, Albatross, and Farewell Lupin, this one feels like the best marriage of Miyazaki and Lupin specifically, where like this is fully a Lupin the Third Part 2 episode. Like that zany plot, we talked about a lot of zany plots last week, Sean. This slots right in there, I think. It's very Lupin Part 2. Like, Lupin is heroic here because he is saving the world from nuclear devastation, but I do believe that Lupin would save the world from nuclear devastation, you know? And also, it's specifically because he didn't get into any of this. Fujiko went and stole the detonation thing because Fujiko is the, like, more amoral one a lot of the time. So she's off doing that. He has to rescue her. And in so doing, he also is going to destroy all of the nukes. So, like, I think it marries the Miyazaki-ness of it. And this is a very Hayao Miyazaki episode. Because the Albatross plane, that is the single most Miyazaki design of anything he's ever designed. That is just, like, that is his fucking id in an airplane design, and it is right there on full display. But I think the Lupin-ness of it is all, like, fully engaged. I am actually, as you said earlier, I'm surprised this isn't the one that the Japanese public said number one to, because this feels like the kind of perfect, like, Lupin-Miyazaki marriage, whereas 155, I like that one a lot, too, but it's a much more awkward marriage of the two sort of sides of the franchise. This one is just kind of fluid and flawless.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it, you know, I like that they keep a little bit of like the eroticism of like, you have that scene with Fujiko at the beginning where she's naked, and then they give her a little bit of clothes throughout the movie, but like the idea is, or throughout the episode, but the idea is like, you know, she's supposed to be effectively be naked. You get Lupin has to get stripped down. And then it's incredibly violent also. Like, it's not gory or whatever, but you know, you're alluding to this when you talked about Cagliostro, but Fujiko just fucking guns people down. She beats the ever living shit out of them. She's like is karate chopping people a lot, which I was like a little bit like, does she know karate? But then especially when she gets the machine gun, she just like turns it on them, and all those dudes like come running through the hallway, and Dr. Robotnik, who's not Dr. Robotnik's like, what the hell's going on? He walks towards the door, and then you see her just like blasting them. It's fucking great. And as you say, it just sort of makes it feel more in line with the kind of chaotic energy of the Lupin the Third franchise that I think Miyazaki had like tended to shy away from in a lot of his episodes of Part 1, and certainly shied away from in Cagliostro. And it is here in full effect in this episode, and then it gets to coincide with all the airplane stuff and all that, which is very much sort of, I think, where his passion is. And I did absolutely cackle in this episode. First, when I saw Fujiko's design and that he gave her a bob cut, I was like, you pervert, like, what the fuck? Like, what is going on with you? Like, why? Why? She has an established character design in the TV show. You let her have long hair in the movie. What the fuck is happening? It was like, well, there's no other woman in the show, so it's got to be her. And then when they went to they were trying to figure out, okay, this whole thing with the nuclear bomb, and it's like, where is the somewhere where there might be like a large draw of power that could go kind of explained. And he's like, well, it might be a museum. They look at the museum. It's like, oh, there's the air museum over here. And it's like an airplane museum. And there's a whole big scene at the airplane museum before the Albatross takes off. I'm like, the motherfucker just can't help himself. He just cannot help himself. He's got to have a bunch of planes and a girl with a babka, and everything he does, it's just an obsession with them. It's fucking great.
It is. And, I think if I were to describe this episode to a hypothetical Lupin the Third fan who somehow hadn't seen it, which there aren't a lot of, but let's say that exists, I would say this kind of feels like Hayao Miyazaki doing The Mystery of Mamo. Like, it has that energy to it of, like, the kind of anarchism, the kineticism, the violence, and the sexuality, because Fujiko and Lupin are both naked for most of this episode, other than, like, Lupin has his boxers on, and she often has just that little, like, shirt covering her breasts, basically. But she's, like, bottomless for a lot of the second half of the episode. We just don't see it. But yeah, like, all of that feels very Mamo-esque. It feels very Monkey Punch-esque. Like, I would imagine this is... I did not find any comments from Monkey Punch on this episode. I would imagine he would really like this one. Like, this feels very much like it could be a plot in his comics, maybe without all the airplane fetishism, but, like, it would be there. And then, yeah, it is... we know Hayao Miyazaki, Yasuo Otsuka loves his classic cars, and Hayao Miyazaki loves his crazy planes. And this one is just, like... more so than I think anything Miyazaki's ever done, just fully, and this is a man who has made movies like Porco Rosso and The Wind Rises. This is just planes galore, and it is this melding of the Albatross itself, which is like this, it's like the Spruce Goose meets these German bombers. It's all these kind of historical influences put together very fluidly. And then there is the plane that Jigen and Lupin are on, which is more of like a Miyazaki flying machine invention, and all of it happening up in midair. It is one of the most incredible action sequences I've seen in anything, live action, animation, what have you. And there's so many different moving pieces to it, with, I think, maybe the highlight of the entire episode being this one shot where I like that this is a story about Fujiko being rescued, but she is fully capable throughout it. Like, it's a very good use of Fujiko. And I think the most jaw-dropping thing in the whole episode is her escape, where she, the guy is sitting down next to her in the, like, booth they're at, and then she karate chops him, gets his gun flies up, she catches it, shoots off both of her handcuffs, grabs the cloth off of the table as she's standing up, wraps it around herself, and then is going through the cabin and, like, knocking people out, grabbing, leaving one gun for a bigger gun, and then getting up to the like other end of the plane. And it is this just long, fluid series of motions where there is not a single wasted motion. The choreography of it is so tight and fluid and fast. It's done in like 30 seconds. It's unreal, and I think it's one of the absolute best cuts of animation I've seen in anything.
Yeah, there's just a ferocity to the speed with which she, like, tears through that airplane as she is, like, kicking people in the face and fucking Austin Powers judo chopping them in the back of the neck, and yes, and then absolutely wrecking them, and as you say, like, getting bigger gun after bigger gun until eventually she gets up. She, like, does that whole thing where she drops the thing that flies back and hits the dude that's on the gun. Then she gets the machine gun, and then she starts gunning them down with the machine gun. It is the biggest mistake they had made is they let Fujiko on that fucking plane, because she's going to murder every single last one of those fuckers.
Is there we talked with the episodes of Part 2 we saw that Fujiko was the one of the five who clearly was, like, used least well in Part 2. Mm-hmm. I have to think this is the best one of the ones we've watched. Maybe there's another one out there, but, like, this is a really I think, standout Fujiko episode. Yeah.
I mean, obviously there's, like, not a lot of, like, character stuff for her to do. Like, it's like she doesn't have, like, a story about her the way you got in some of those Part 1 episodes. But certainly in terms of, like, the energy and how, like, kind of cool she is and how, like, kind of central she is to the action, it's definitely the best she was used for any of the Part 2 stuff we saw.
Yeah, I mean, like, Fujiko being stripped and handcuffed but still being completely cool and collected, and then going into all the action. This is another one where I just have to imagine Mari Okada, thought about this a lot writing The Woman Called Fujiko Mine show from 2012, because there are lines in here where, like, I'm listening to Eiko Masuyama read them, and I can hear Miyuki Sawashiro do it. Like, this is one that she could have done these lines. She couldn't because she was like a baby when this came out, but like, or I don't know if she was even born yet, but like she absolutely, you can hear like how the modern version of Fujiko would do it. It's just a very good, as you say, it's not like necessarily a character story, but the character still reads so powerfully in it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which is something that was not true of a lot of Part 2 episodes.
Yeah, absolutely. You also have, because Zenigata is with them on the plane for all of that, and you have that moment where Jigen gets Zenigata's sidearm and hits back and fires all the missiles away as they're coming at them, and then asks for extra ammo, and Zenigata is a normal cop, so he doesn't have an extra clip on him, and Jigen hands it back and slinks back down, and just is like bored, like, all right, well, nothing more for me to do. That felt like a little Yasuo Otsuka touch of Jigen just like, okay, I'm done. And he just slinks away. That made me laugh so hard.
Yeah, because it's also like the animation on him ejecting the magazine of that pistol is so detailed that, it feels like Yasuo Otsuka must have animated that one because it's like, that's some good gun detail there. And there is something funny about, like, you've been so trained of seeing Jigen using his revolver. And I think it's because there's so much like detail in the animation that when he ejects the slide, you're like, or the magazine, you're like, oh God, Jigen, what are you doing? You should be using like a semi-automatic modern pistol like that. Where's your revolver, buddy? It's like, obviously his revolver had gotten taken away. But there's, it's that whole moment is phenomenal. I definitely laughed when Jigen just hands City the gun back. It just goes back to the stairs like, well, here you go. You deal with it. It's like,
I also just love the idea that Jigen, of course, expects people to have a crazy amount of ammo. But Zenigata is just a normal, like, cop. He's not going to be taking, like, 7 clips with him. He doesn't think he's going to have to fire more than 9 shots. And so it's just... That's like, this one makes really good use of the whole cast. Goemon is really only in the first half, but he still has some really key moments. Like, they do the whole repeat of Lupin and Jigen running and jumping from Cagliostro, but now they're naked. And then you have Goemon doing this spectacularly timed cut across, like, the cars chasing them and the dock so that they are on the boat and they can get out of there. That's really incredible. Just really good stuff with everybody. And with Fujiko, I didn't even mention one of my favorite parts is that after she gets to like the cockpit area, then for the rest of the episode, she is up in, I guess she's not in the cockpit, but she's like up in like the gun deck, and they keep trying to get her. And like the Dr. Robotnik guy is like throwing grenades, and then she just throws it right back. There's so much phenomenal comic timing of her on the gun, just fucking with these guys, and it is hilarious.
Yes, because the first one is he throws the grenade down and it goes down into the hole she's in, and then she just pops back up and throws it back to them and explodes. Then fake Dr. Robotnik gets like a giant bundle of grenades and she just like shoots it and it just explodes right in his hands.
Yes.
Yeah, it's amazing. There's an incredible piece of animation around this point where, because when the first grenade goes off, the middle engine becomes dislodged and flies away, and then Lupin's plane has gotten really fucked up at this point, and he's like going to crash down. So he comes down and he like severs the other 2 engines with the wings of his plane, and it's like and he like comes back up, and then his wings pop off, and the plane starts to fall out of the air, and the sense of like momentum of him starting up high, gliding down, coming through, cutting out those engines, swooping back up, his wings popping off so he loses all momentum as it like points perfectly up, slows, hits the apex of its rise, and then slowly starts falling back down. The like sense of like weight and momentum and the aerodynamics of how all that is working is so good and so well observed. That's when you get your, Miyazaki's weird plane fetishism really at work here, is the sense of how that like flight works and the physics of it all working in animation. It's just really, really, really good.
Yeah, oh my God, this one so blows me away. I'm looking through my notes. Here's another moment I wanted to mention because it's so funny, is there is this whole thing where Lupin and Jigen get arrested by Zenigata, and Zenigata is stripping them down in the back of the truck, and there's all the stuff that they have hidden on them. Like Lupin has a false foot that Zenigata pulls off at one point, and then what happens and how they get away is that he pulls off Lupin's hair, and there's a bomb in there, and then Lupin and Jigen run away. But you also have this moment where he stripped them naked, and then he says, well, don't take away their dignity. And not taking away their dignity for Zenigata is he gives Lupin back his underwear and Jigen his hat. And I think that's just such a perfect little thing of like, Lupin, you can have your boxers, and Jigen, you can have your hat. That's a great scene. Yeah, that's the other thing about this is just like how much is packed into these 20 minutes, how many beats the story goes through, that you've so perfectly integrated Zenigata and all of the supporting cast. Everyone has moments. It's perfect. It is a perfect 20 minutes of animation. I can't believe it exists. I finished this and I just was catching my breath writing, holy fuck, how did they do that? And I have no idea how they fucking did this on a TV schedule. There's that shot that is the full reveal of the Albatross, where what's simultaneously happening is the doors to the hangar are opening while the camera pulls back. Mm-hmm. Very complicated shot to do in animation. And the scale of it, I felt like I'm sitting here watching this on my 55-inch TV, nice big TV, but in that moment, I felt like this was an IMAX movie or something, just the size of what was going on. I can't imagine being a kid in Japan in 1980 and seeing this show up on my TV. It would blow my mind.
Yeah, it's an incredible feat. It is like you said earlier, it is for me this episode 99, and then the G and in Russia episode are the three trinity of part 2 episodes. They're I don't know which one is the best of those three. They're all kind of almost equally good. But it is really fun. And not just best part 2 episode, but one of the best episodes of TV animation, particularly just from a production and execution point of view of any anime we've seen.
Yeah. I think, and honestly, if you ask me what is my favorite of the Miyazaki Lupin joints that we've seen, as much as I love Cagliostro, I might have to give it to Albatross Wings of Death, because it is such a perfect marriage of all these things. Obviously, a 20-minute TV episode is very hard to compare to a 100-minute movie. And I've seen this episode now once or twice. I watched it once and I watched every clip of it probably again as I was going through this. And I've lived with Cagliostro much longer, so maybe it's a recency bias, but this is the tops. This is so good.
I mean, I would say for me personally, I think I do prefer this one of the three that we've watched. Now, obviously, that is, again, partially because, I think I have a stronger affinity to that more anarchic, chaotic thing in Lupin and less of a... I like Miyazaki stuff, but I don't have, a really strong personal affinity to it the way that, you do, Jonathan. So for me personally, I think this is the one that plays the most to my tastes of the certainly the part 2 Miyazaki stuff.
It also just blows my mind to think that Miyazaki and the Telecom crew broke their asses making Castle of Cagliostro in 5 months. Telecom doesn't air another Lupin episode until I think June of 1980, so they had a little bit of a break. Not that full 6 months, but presumably a little bit of a break. But then the very next thing Miyazaki directs is this. Just, it's crazy. Where did that come from? And I know the answer is that this is a lot of cut material planned for Cagliostro, but it still is a level of energy that kind of blows me away.
Yeah, no, it's crazy.
155, also crazy, but in a different way. Farewell, my beloved Lupin. Farewell, oh dearest Lupin. It's translated in a couple of different ways. I think Miyazaki, I had a note here in the history section that Miyazaki wanted to call this episode Thieves Love the Peace, which is what it's called in some international versions. That's what Crunchyroll calls this episode for some reason. But the broadcast title, Farewell, oh dearest Lupin, that is the title of the final chapter of the original Lupin the Third manga, which is otherwise unrelated to this. But yeah,
both of those are weird titles for this episode, given what this episode is. Neither of them really make sense. I was really surprised by this episode, because I think I was going in, because I knew the title was Farewell, my beloved Lupin, that it would have been a more self-consciously, this is the last episode kind of episode, and it a little bit is at the very, very end. But Lupin and crew are barely in the episode. I mean, it's part of the premise, but they only come in the last 5 minutes.
Yeah, so there's a lot going on in this one. So let's describe that. This is about, you have the robot from Laputa. That's the first and most notable thing to say, is that, and it's not even a prototype of the version of the robot from Laputa. It is the robot that I met on the roof of the Studio Ghibli Museum, a statue of it, and I had my picture taken with it. It is that robot. The only thing that's different from the version in Laputa is it has these little helicopter wings around its neck, or helicopter blades around its neck. But otherwise, it is basically exactly that robot. And Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind, who is named Maki here, is flying around in it, and they are robbing shit. And it comes to be seen that it is Lupin is controlling all of this with Jigen and Goemon. Although Lupin has a very creepy, like Grinch who stole Christmas grin, which is how you know it must not be Lupin. And their plan is to use the robot to terrorize the city so that people will learn the inhumanity of robots and not want to use these robots. And as the plot goes, you find out that Maki is the daughter of the doctor, the scientist who invented the robot, and she is compelled to try to stop it being used as a weapon. But Lupin and crew are actually duplicates or people in disguise working for the defense contractor who invented these, and this is actually all like an advertisement for the robots, because as they say, the more evil and awful something is, the more it will sell. And then Lupin, Zenigata is kind of like our hero of this episode, running around trying to save the day, and we ultimately learn Zenigata is Lupin in disguise, and then he saves Maki at the end and flies away. So that is the best I can do, I think, summarizing the episode. It's a weird one. There's a lot I really like about this one. I really do like the entire, because this is a very Monkey Punch touch. So he does this in a bunch of chapters of everybody is kind of in disguise as everybody else. Mm-hmm. And I think the thing of like our hero being Zenigata, but it's actually Lupin, is really well done. I think the way he's animated, and particularly how Goro Naya captures a bunch of Yasuo Yamada's cadences as he talks, is really cool. And I love all of that stuff. But there's definitely a lot. It's a very busy episode.
Yeah, I think like the thing that it's a weird episode, particularly to be the finale, because I mean, basically, it's an Ultraman episode is what the plot is, right? And it's like stylistically what it is doing as well is it's pulling from like kaiju movies. With like the scenes of the robot coming through the city and all the people being scared and running away, and you've got like your shot of like the news clippings popping up to deliver like the exposition, and the like black and white footage of the scientist who got wrapped up in this thing and he was not prepared for it, and then his beautiful young daughter has to be involved in it as well. And all you need is like Zenigata / Lupin to be like an impossibly handsome, square-jawed Japanese young man to like get involved, and he's like a reporter / cop, one of the two, and then gets involved romantically with the beautiful daughter of the scientist. That's just the plot of a random Godzilla movie, or again of like any random episode of Ultraman. The big difference would be at some point then the robot would have become giant, and then you'd have to have Ultraman turn into Ultraman, or Godzilla would pop up or whatever and fight the robot. But the bones of the plot are pulling from that tradition. And I think like trying to, for me personally, like the way they tried to match that onto getting the Lupin stuff in there felt really awkward. Like it just was like you had to cram in, how do we have the Lupin characters intersect with this, especially because it's all subterfuge. So it's like you don't get up front a clear sort of vision of how does Lupin interact with this genre or this style of story, because it's all that has already happened off screen before the episode has actually begun. And it just like, it didn't, for me, that like the story didn't all come together as an episode of Lupin. It was a perfectly fun robot story, but to me, like this didn't need to be an episode of Lupin at all. Like you could have very easily cut this out and turned it into an episode of Ultraman, and you would kind of, obviously it would be live action in that instance, and you'd have an Ultraman fight at the end, but it would be a very easy example of surgery to do, to take the core of this plot and just transplant it over there.
The other major influence on this episode that's really obvious, I think it's very much a conscious homage to this, is the Fleischer Brothers Superman cartoon, The Mechanical Monsters, which is one of the Fleischer Brothers Superman, which by the time this episode comes out will finally be on Blu-ray in the United States, which is really cool. Warner Archive is doing a disc of those. If you've never seen those are like some of the definitive Superman works of all time. Those are the first time in a visual media Superman flew and stuff. But there is one of the famous episodes, I showed this in my Giant Robot series, is called The Mechanical Monsters. And it is a pretty similar plot to this one. And it has been homaged in a bajillion different places. I paired it when I taught it with the movie Sky Captain in the World of Tomorrow, which opens with a very clear homage to it. And yeah, so that is in this one as well. I think what what makes this an episode of Lupin to me is I really do like the Zenigata as Lupin dynamic of it. I think is very fun, and I think Goro Naya is great. And then otherwise, yeah, I think I am mostly enjoying this one as kind of a prototype Miyazaki work, because I think Castle of Cagliostro and Albatross Wings of Death stand 100% tall on their own merits. This one does feel quite a bit more like this is a prototype of stuff he would do later. Like, not just because you have Nausicaa and the robot's character design in here, but like a lot of the destruction that goes on with the robot. One of the most famous and best scenes in Laputa is this big scene of destruction that does feel like just a building on something he kind of experimented with here. I think a lot of the like Maki character, who is also voiced by Sumi Shimamoto, and some of that stuff does also feel like, okay, this is a prototype of something we're going to get later. I think it's a very good episode. I think it's good, though, in the ways you're saying, Sean, of like, it doesn't necessarily always have to be Lupin. And then it is good as a production, as a Miyazaki thing. It was very popular when it aired. This one does, like, I think, Sean, you told us about back in, like, the first episode of this season, like, if you look at, like, the highest rated Japanese episodes in TV history, this is one of them. This had, like, a 30% share. So part of why the Japanese public might have this memory of it is it was, like, a very big broadcast event. And it was very spectacular when it came out, and I can see why. But it is an interesting one. Like, I'm imagining all the people who met Lupin III through the Greatest Capers tape, and what they had was the Albatross episode and then this one, and that would be such a bizarre cross-section introduction to Lupin. Like, because of the whole play on that these are evil Lupin, Goemon, and Jigen, if you don't know those characters, it wouldn't quite play right. And, like, the whole what Zenigata is doing as Lupin would be weird if, like, especially if you're dubbing it, and the actor has no existing version of Lupin to play off of, because the fun is Goro Naya knows how Yasuo Yamada sounds and is doing that. No dub actor could do that when you haven't dubbed anything else. So it's kind of funny that this one had the reputation it did. Not because it's bad or anything, it's weird. That's why.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, I think it wouldn't stand out to me as much if it was just like another episode of Lupin III, and you're like, oh yeah, this is really good. Like, if it was just like a random one-off episode in the middle, it was just like, yeah, this is like, it's got a kind of a weird premise. Like, I'm not entirely sure. I think I would restructure things slightly to like get a little bit more material out of the feeling of Lupin intersecting with a genre that he usually doesn't interact with, which is your giant robot kaiju kind of stories. And like, I think you could have done a bit more and had a bit more fun with that mashup if you didn't also combine that with such a heavy kind of like subterfuge thing with Lupin being in disguise the whole time. But there's something particularly weird about then the ending of the episode has to be sort of built as, and now this is the last episode of Lupin III Part 2. So now we have to get all the different Lupin gang, get their one big moment, and then you have your big last scene at the very end, which feels so divorced from the actual story, which is about Maki. Like, Lupin is not important in the story at all. This is Maki's story about her being deceived and being betrayed, and her having to like look through that and like find her strength and win. And she's so the protagonist of this episode that it's really weird that the episode at the end then has to be, this is the last episode of Lupin III, so we have to be about all of our Lupin characters. Right? It's so different than the Lupin III Part 1 finale, which was also clearly built as an episode self-consciously as the finale. But for there, it was them saying, this is our last episode, so let's just go crazy, madcap with it. Let's throw like everything in like the kitchen sink at this episode, and really make it the like sort of most chaotic, high energy episode we can as a celebration of this weird show we have made, and like came in halfway through and helped finish and all that kind of stuff. And so that like worked really well as a finale episode. This is a weird fusion of a very one-off on its own kind of unique episode of Lupin, and then also it has to be your finale episode that celebrates what the show was.
And I like the final scene. I like the kind of style of, she says, "Arigato, Lupin," and then it plays the superhero insert song, which I don't remember if it was in any of the episodes we watched.
99.
It was there from 99.
It's in the car at the end of the car chase in episode 99 is when we saw it.
Yeah, and it's because it was throughout. It's one of the songs that was there for most of the run. But I think it's a cool one to end with. I love the whole energy and lyrics of that song. And like, Lupin was basically a superhero in this one, so I think it works. And then you have them all driving. You have Fujiko on her bike. They're along the coast. It ends with this pan up to Mount Fuji. I think that's kind of a fun counterpoint to how part one ends with them swimming away from Japan, and this one ends with them back on their home base and like pan up to Mount Fuji. Little kind of nationalist moment to end things with. It also leads to, though, in the streamlined dub from the Greatest Capers tape, I did watch this, Sean, or this last scene. It's very funny because they couldn't call him Lupin in that version, remember? So it ends with her saying, "Thank you, Wolf," and then it goes into Lupin, 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 Lupin the Third, because it's still there in the lyrics. And so it's like, "Thank you, Wolf," and then just singing Lupin over and over again. I laughed very hard at that. I don't know how that works on copyright. You can call him it in the song, but not in the dialogue. It was all a weird zone, I guess, with this character, but it did make me laugh very hard.
I have to imagine that's probably like the kind of thing where they were more worried about a copyright violation if they named the character Lupin rather than they were threatened with one. And so they're like, well, yeah, fuck it. You know, if they come after us because of the song, so be it. That would be very hard to change. Either you have to make a new song, like do some like weird surgery to transplant a song somewhere else in the soundtrack here, record our own song, or we just throw our hands up and say, well, who gives a shit?
Right. Yeah. And ultimately, it was not that live an issue because no one ever did sue over this. And the next time someone came to bat for Lupin in English, they just dropped the whole wolf thing. But it is funny in those episodes. You can see that. I did find on archive.org, this is always where I go to look for something like this. Someone did just rip the VHS of Greatest Capers, and it's up there on archive.org. So I did kind of look around at that to kind of see how they stitched this together. And it's just it's very funny. In the opening credits, it is just the normal fourth opening that we had on this episode, but at a certain point, they just put up a static screen that is kind of Lupin standing there, and they've put the text Lupin the Third's Greatest Capers for like 20 seconds of the opening just layered over it. And then the finale is a sort of weird pitch-shifted version, because they had to slow it down a little bit to fit all their text in, of Love Squall, which was not the one used here. That would have been the third ending, but by this point we were on to Love is Everything. So that was kind of funny.
Oh, the wild world of anime VHS tapes back in the day, and all the things they had to do. It's very different. You know, now we've got the like, oh, here's this subtitle track that existed that was played on one version of the movie on an airline 30 years ago, and we've reconstructed it through exhaustive detail in case you want to see it. We live in a much more comprehensive home video world with some of these releases now.
Well, and Discotek did put all this on their Lupin the Third Part 2 DVDs. You can find the streamlined dubs are there on the like remastered footage, and then they did also put up the VHS footage of the opening and ending so you can see it, because yes, the Discotek people are crazy, and I love them for it. They are basically a fan-subbing group that has gone mad with power, and it's great.
Yes, never stop. It is amazing.
Yeah, never stop Discoteking. You guys are great. Yeah, I mean, again, I do want to praise the animation in this final episode is unreal.
Oh, yeah.
There is, all the stuff with the robot in the city. I think there's this whole sequence where Zenigata is moving. He's on a train, and then he's running around the disaster area trying to save civilians. He eventually gets on a motorcycle, and the motorcycle animation is great. And then I think all the stuff where they are on the robot named Lambda is the name of the robot here, and they're flying around on it at night. And this is where he fully gets the mask off, and it's just the city. Like, it's this impossibly detailed background animation of the like Tokyo at night as they are flying over that. It is also just kind of out of body to be looking at. I don't want to sell short. This is also one of the great achievements of animation in TV history.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like, as a production, it's phenomenal. I think it's just like some of the writing around what it has to be feels like it diminishes the story's potential. Like, it feels like an awkward story that they're trying to tell with all the demands on the episode, but like all the individual pieces that go together to make up what it is are incredibly well executed. As you're saying, the performances both by Goto Naya, who is doing his Zenigata Yasu Yamada thing, and like the way that they play Zenigata sort of slowly slipping out of character occasionally, and then he gets back into it, is very well done, because it's so done so that you can like, you're meant to be able to catch on fairly early that there's something going on. Oh, he's probably Lupin, but they don't really like play it too hard. They seed it just enough that like you feel clever once you've kind of put it together that must be what's happening. And then all the robot animation is awesome, and the designs of the robots are very cool, cool enough that they get used it again. And I love the way that the robot transforms and everything, and the Maki character design is very good, so good that it gets used again. Yeah, I mean, it is, like I said though, with 145, I did cackle incredibly hard when, like, 2 seconds into the episode starting, you get an airplane, and then, like, 2 minutes into the episode starting, you get a girl with a bob cut. You're like, what the fuck is wrong with you, man? Can you not? Could you do one thing where you do have just, like, girls have long hair, or there's no airplanes anywhere? Like, what's going on?
This is auteur theory, man. You just can't hide it. It's a very teachable way to show auteur theory, is that even when doing Lupin episodes, Miyazaki couldn't keep it in. You gotta have girls with bob cuts, and you gotta have airplanes, and you gotta have cool robots. It's all there for us. So yeah, this is us, Sean, now wrapping up the Lupin the Third and Miyazaki experience, because Miyazaki never worked on this again. And we're wrapping up the Part 2 experience. Any final reflections from the Part 2 era of Lupin the Third?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, we didn't do a comprehensive Part 2 thing, because that would have been its own season, is just watching all Part 2. But it is, it is a phenomenal show, and I'm very excited to go back. I know that you've been watching some episodes. I've watched a couple of episodes on my own time, just kind of filling in some gaps. That it's an incredible show. The movie Cagliostro, again, I think I personally, my preference goes to Mystery of Mamo for, like, the zaniness and the weirdness, but it is a phenomenally constructed film, and there's just this sense of sort of the weird impossibility of this show, of how good it is, of how good the production is, of how many all-time great people at every stage of the production touched this thing, and then, made this show amazing, and then went on to do incredible stuff and kind of define the anime industry in general. It is just a real kind of touchstone for this whole of the wild and wacky world of anime that we like to talk about on this show.
I agree completely. I am definitely, I think, feeling myself in a mode with Lupin that I have not been in since the early days of Weekly Suit Gundam, where I am just obsessed getting my hands on whatever I can. I did this whole road trip in between recording this episode and the last episode, Sean, and I drove 12 hours both ways, so I spent like 24 hours in the car. A lot of that was just me listening to different Lupin albums and all of Yuji Ono's jazz albums, and it is so my shit. We might have to do a bonus episode at some point of me just talking about all the Lupin music I've found, because I have been doing a deep dive, and there's a lot there, but it is crazy. And then I do want to quickly run through, because I made these notes and they're very funny. I did watch all of the Telecom episodes. Can I summarize these for you really quickly, Sean? Just a couple of these.
Yes, because you've texted me a few of them as you saw them, I think, in kind of like disbelief at when they were occurring.
Yeah. 72 is the murder mystery with Columbo's son, Belanco. Like I mentioned, it's great. You should watch it. 77 is an episode about an astrology expert using horoscopes and a robot bird to catch Lupin. It's very funny. 82 is about rescuing Zenigata from a group of French terrorists who are working to revive the Napoleonic Empire and rescue their leader, Napoleon the 11th, who, in a reversal of the original Napoleon, can only be awake 3 hours a day, which is fucking great. Instead of only sleeping.
I really need someone to check their math on Napoleon the 11th. That feels like that's a bit too high. Like, that's a long time to get to the 11th generation of Napoleons. Or they had kids very young consistently.
Number 84 is about Jigen's mentor, Joe Spade. Mwah, perfect.
Oh, yeah.
Who, Joe Spade, once upon a time the world's greatest killer. He's attacked, he needs Jigen and Lupin's help to get revenge. But wait, Joe Spade is the real bad guy because his son graduated from Harvard and worked at NASA and built a basically Star Trek teleporter machine using fax machine technology. And the plot involves Lupin teleporting himself from France to New York in a super psychedelic sequence with a fax machine. It's wild. 143, this might be my favorite of the ones on this list. So like not 99, not 145, but this one is called Anniversary of the Miami Bank Robbery. This has one of the best Lupin premises ever, where there's a bank in Miami that is failing. They have no more depositors. They're about to go under, and their Hail Mary idea is to get Lupin to rob them so that they will become famous, because Lupin III only robs first-rate banks. And it is an unbelievable comedy masterpiece, very similar animation to 145 and 155 in that it just doesn't stop moving, and there is so much crazy stuff going on. But the big gag is that when Lupin does eventually rob the bank, there's nothing there to steal. So then Miami Bank advertises itself as the bank even Lupin couldn't steal a single cent from. And they become a really big bank. And that is their thing. Like, they win because Lupin couldn't rob them. It's so funny. And then 153 is called The Bills from God. This one's kind of all over the place. It involves several scenes where Lupin has Jigen shoot with a gun a laxative into Zenigata's mouth, so he has to shit himself and get away from them so they can do things. But the basic gag of the episode is they steal all this money, and then they build a church out of the money to hide it because they meet a kindly nun. It's a weird one, but also fun. If you're going to watch only one of these, though, Anniversary of the Miami Bank Robbery, oh my God. It's on par with like 58, 99, 145, but it is more on the comedy side, and it is just perfect.
That sounds basic. Yeah, like I need to get back in. That's the thing with Lupin the Third Part 2. You know, there's a hell of a lot of it. It
never ends.
Yeah, we only scrape the surface. You know, I still need to go watch the episode that's set in Mecca. That's one I still need to pull out.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, should we tell the kids what we're doing next time, Sean?
Yes, because actually I did not remember off the top of my head what we're doing next time. What are we doing next time, Jonathan?
The Pink Jacket Adventures. We are moving on to Lupin III Part 3, the anime that aired 1984 to 1985. We are going to be watching 20 episodes from Part 3. It's a 50-episode show, and I'll tell you what those are in a second. We will also be watching the movie that came out during Part 3 called The Legend of the Gold of Babylon that is credited to Seijun Suzuki himself. And Seijun Suzuki also wrote an episode of Part 3 we'll be watching. Part 3 is kind of infamous in being more sort of uneven, but that makes me all the more excited to see what the hell it is. It's got quite the reputation. I have picked these 20 episodes. I did 10 from the first 30 episodes and 10 from the last 20 episodes because this show has a reputation for getting fucking weird after episode 30. It's like this division point where people and fans say, like, the animation gets crazy, it gets really experimental. So I kind of looked at recommendations and thought about things and divided it between those. So the 20 episodes we are watching, and the numbering is even everywhere. This is on the Discotheque set. This is on Crunchyroll. So should be easy. And there is no dub for Part 3, so there's no alternate titles. Number 1, The Gold is Beckoning Lupin. Number 3, Good Afternoon, Hell's Angel. Number 7, The Man is Called the Death Garb. Number 11, The Ruby Sheds Bloody Tears. Number 13, this is the Seijun Suzuki written one, Play a Joke on the Variation. Number 18, Showtime Smells of Death. Number 23, The Strategy of Beirut Mobile Bank Robbery. Number 24, Pray for the Repose of Your Soul. 27 and 28, which is a two-parter. Codename is Alaska Star, and the Alaska Star is a ticket to hell. Number 30, the name of the cocktail is Revenge. Number 31, Reversal, Reversal, and again Reversal. Number 34, Manhattan Crisis. Number 37, Pops Boils Over with Rage. Number 38, Letitia Loved Me. Number 40, In a Panic Over the Treasure. Number 44, Our Papa is a Thief. Number 46, Worn Out Wings. Number 49, Pops was adopted into the family. And number 50, Kill the Atomic Submarine Ivanov. I am so excited for this one, Sean. I haven't seen a second of Pink Jacket Lupin, and I want to see what the Pink Jacket is all about. This is going to be a good one.
Yes, well, I have my pile of Lupin Blu-rays that I bought when we started doing the season, and, you know, I didn't do this on purpose, but I just happened to have Part 3 was at the top of that pile. And so I have, every time I walk by where my DVDs and Blu-rays are, that pile is sitting there, and I look at that Pink Jacket, I'm like, that's a good-looking jacket.